Another stressful day of telework done. I'm ready to relax with a newspaper. Let's check out the current events. Nope. Oh, I know. I'll pick something from my private library. Something relaxing to read. I like to read about a simpler time. Here we go. The history of the Americas. How about a nice, relaxing peek into the future with my crystal ball? Crystal ball? What's the world gonna look like in 30 minutes? Doesn't seem promising. Serves me right, I suppose, to look away from current events. No matter how different things are, cooler heads will prevail. Society will march on to a better tomorrow. I'll just have to have faith in my community to push forward no matter the cost. And certainly, no minor inconvenience that can occur in this apartment will ruin my life.
Greg, I hate to interrupt your soliloquy, but you know that Christmas dinner plate you've kept in the freezer because it was from the last time you were able to be close to your family? You know, the one in the really sentimental looking Tupperware? And you also know how you have a really hungry roommate who's disconnected from common sense and doesn't know boundaries?
Dos. Uno. LA Meekly, episode 79 starts. When do we start?
Pronto.
Pronto.
That's not Spanish, is it?
No, I think that's Italian. I don't know how to say now in Spanish. I could say here. It starts aquí. The podcast that'll have you saying, wow, you've done a lot of Duolingo, haven't you? And that owl was really proud of you.
Well, you don't seem to have a lot of work from your work at home assignments. Interesting.
I'm fattening up my resume by learning how to speak Spanish.
I'm fattening. I'm fattening up, period. I've been eating every time we get groceries. I always, we got to get ice cream too. And pudding, you know.
Oh, yeah. You and my dad should go shopping together.
I'm not going shopping with you. I know what your dad is like going shopping.
Oh, he promises me that he won't touch much. He touches everything, and then he wets his fingers to open up the plastic bag to put fruits and veggies in, and that's how you get coronavirus. But both of you would... I feel like there's about three... Well, what are they called? Not rows in a market.
3 pillars of Christianity?
3 pillars of Christianity. There's
aisles.
Holy Spirit. Whatever. There's 3 departments in the market. They're not. I sound like a rich person who's never been to the market before.
How much does milk go for?
There we go. There's 3 aisles that you and my dad, I'm sure, would concentrated.
Well, I like the plastic bag aisle, the one where you have to lick your fingers.
You get to lick your fingers. You don't have to. You get to.
Bugs are like flying in my mouth.
Yeah. They look like microscopic versions of the monster from The Host, and they're everywhere.
I know. I don't know why these crazy bugs are all over my building and in no other building that I've ever seen.
If a scientist would come here, he'd be like, oh, my word.
What do you mean if a scientist would come here?
Oh, God.
I've been deputized an official citizen scientist by the Natural History Museum.
I've taken a library-sponsored class online for free.
I took a Duolingo in science, and I think I'm quite fluent.
Oh, boy. Hi.
Hi. We're recording yet again. We're in the parking structure of my building recording. Yeah. People walk by. Oh, you're so funny. Yeah, well, tell it to us on iTunes.
Yeah, tell it to me on Patreon.
Tell it to me in the form of cold hard cash. We're here again, being safe. You're sitting. You finally brought a chair to sit in the back of your truck. So now your grandma Clamp it from the Beverly Hillbillies. You're just so comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't bring a rocking chair.
Hey, we're evolving this, and we're learning as we go. We did this in a park originally, and have been uncomfortable for, I think, 2 episodes since then.
2 months.
Yeah.
2 months straight you've been uncomfortable.
And now I figured it out. A chair in the bed of my truck. I got to put my feet up.
And I'm going to take a Duolingo on how to put rocking abilities into chairs fluently.
I have the time now.
Wearing your Twilight Zone shirt.
It's
sinking into you.
I'm going to reference as many Twilight Zone episodes as I can while I wear this shirt.
Hocus Pocus and Frisbee.
Robot boxing.
Oh my God, I forgot about that one.
It's a really good episode. I'm still mad at Kyle Clark.
I prefer the Hugh Jackman movie about it. Rock'em Sock'em.
It doesn't have Rock'em Sock'em Robots. It doesn't have the heart. Chappie. It's a dumber name than Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
No, Chappie's not. There was literally a boxing robot movie. It's not Chappie. No, Chappie is. I think actually Chappie's a cop.
Then I hate him. No.
That I would like to defund Chappie. First off, before we get into this, I'm Daniel's I'm.
Wow, you haven't said your full name in a while.
I took so much Duolingo, I forgot English. I'm Daniel Zaffron.
I'm Greg Gonzalez.
Beautiful.
Not the one from the band.
Let's welcome our new Patreon people.
Okay.
Nobody else, just our Patreon people. Everyone else can go sit on it.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Sit on it being a throne of love from us, but let's hear from the Patreon people who
do not have to sit on it, but they can. They get to sit
it's
on
their
it.
option. We don't make them sit on the throne. That's the punishment, but they can.
You can if you want to. It's the punishment and the reward. So new this month, we've got Zachary Wyman.
Hi,
And-
Zach. Or Zachary. I was too formal. I
Very
apologize.
presumptuous.
I was too
Wow.
informal.
I think you need to sit on it. You've brought the chair. Now sit on it. And we've also got Eric Martinez.
A wonderful illustrator.
Yeah. You were saying that you knew his work before you knew that he knew us.
Yeah, I saw he was I went to LACMA to the bookstore, and he had done an illustration of Karen Dalton, who's like one of my favorite singers. So I started following him online, and
In the LACMA bookstore?
LACMA has that gift shop.
Not anymore, but yeah.
Yeah, that might be the only thing that's still there.
Because it makes money.
But I was going through one of the books, and I don't know if it was all about
Really?
Karen Dalton or if it was about female singers, but he had an illustration of Karen Dalton, and I
Pretty impressive.
thought it was great. Yeah.
I say this a million times. Our fans are so much more impressive than we are.
Oh, yeah, a million times more.
I mean, obviously it goes without saying, but
Yeah.
even the worst of our fans, I'm going to pick a name. Let's just say Ada Ruiz.
I can feel her blood getting hot from over here. We are miles apart, and I could feel.
We are
I could
6
sense
feet
something.
apart.
Yeah, no. Sometimes I'll just talk to people kind of randomly on Instagram. We'll, share words sometimes like, "Oh, wow, you're really smart. You're much smarter than I'll ever be."
You're talking about
you have
that's how
well-formed opinions.
we communicate only on Instagram. You're talking about me. Sit on it. So what is it? It's July 1st. It's been a crazy month. Not only just June 1st to July 1st, but since we last recorded the last episode, which was on Memorial Day.
Yeah.
So much is.
Yes.
A lot of stuff has happened, which we're going to get into in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
I felt helpless this entire month.
Yeah.
We could talk about more about this later, but I felt helpless of like, we have a tiny voice.
Yeah,
but
we have a
like,
small megaphone.
yeah, what can we really do until next month when we can devote 3 hours to this or whatever? But like, I kind of felt helpless in the past month of.
Especially because I wanted to go to so many
I know.
protests and marches, and like couldn't find anyone to go with me, which is fine. Oh, the Shoop Troop. Well, they wanted to invite me to a couple, but it was days that we were going to work out. But then also COVID-19 is still a thing, and
Yeah,
I cannot get it.
I was torn between being terrified of getting sick and being terrified of being shot by the police. Like, I don't know which scared me more. It was just horrible.
Yeah, it's been a really different month.
I've been angry 24 hours, maybe 23, 21 hours a day. I got this Jurassic Park video game to distract me, but I've just been angry nonstop.
I really fell into a hole maybe 2 days into the protests. I just started watching things about the riots that I'm going to cover, and I just fell into a hole again, and I would have started reading books, and I really went into it.
Well, what better month to be connected in that way than this month?
And this is an episode that's long overdue. I've been talking about, we're trying to find a way to talk about the LA riots.
For a long, we did not Watts, Sleepy Lagoon and the Zoot Suit riots had its own sort of thing. But
right, and we also covered that one in Century City where the police.
Yeah, and there was the Black Cat stuff.
Oh,
also.
right.
Yeah, these ones were like
Rage.
we knew this was going to happen, so we were saving it for this month.
And I can tell why we were so, I don't want to say reluctant to do it, but I knew that I would certainly
It's
get
so
more
heavy.
emotional.
Yeah,
doing
I know.
This one
I
than
know.
famous hot dogs of LA. I knew this was going to be the one where I'm
that could be a tie. I get very emotional when the crunch, Greg, the snap.
And I was still watching footage of Florence and Normandy. I'm like, can I see arts from where I'm sitting?
Also gone in the past few
Also
months.
gone. And hey, everybody needs to, I know we're all giving our money to good efforts right now. There's a lot out there, including Yemen, which is going through a huge.
Is it?
Yeah.
Huh.
They're
What's going on
people
in
are
Yemen?
Starving in the streets.
Didn't know that now.
Oh, you didn't know about
Now
that?
I'm even angry.
Probably look into that. But also now it seems so much more trivial. But Old Town Music Hall's not looking good.
What's
They're
going on
asking
with
for money because they're
Huh.
hey, we don't know if we're gonna make it out of this thing. A lot of people were Pacific Dining Car in Santa Monica had to close and they auctioned off all their stuff.
420 Blackbird Diner is gone, which
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like we talked about in the last episode. And then, sure enough, the curse of maybe if we talk about racism enough in this episode, it'll go away.
It'll go away.
It'll go out of business.
It'll lose its cool.
I mean, it's asking for a lot of money right now in certain states, but maybe if we talk about it enough, it can just die already. Yeah. Well, let's talk about our thing of the month from the past month.
You go first because I have to remember what mine was.
Mine is, since I've been inside exclusively, the only thing I have is, I posted it on our Instagram earlier in the month, but that short film, Felicia.
Oh, yeah.
It was a short film made by some UCLA students. It was like a 10-minute documentary or whatever about this high school girl in Watts named Felicia and her, like, what her life is like in Watts. And it was made like 2-3 months before what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see like a first person's perspective.
Yeah.
Because there isn't, as I'll go into, there's not a lot of footage of Watts. There's a lot of printed word, but to hear someone actually talking and seeing
It's
them.
such a soft-spoken voice, too.
Yeah, she's got a really nice, relaxing voice. Well, because she's like a 17-year-old girl, and that's perfectly showing like, why does she have to go through this?
Yeah.
Why does she have to live like this?
Talking about like the differences just in like, not just in schools, but like just talking about
Just
differences
parks.
in schools, just like, oh my God, that's...
Yeah, and just like talking about going to a park in her neighborhood, which I don't even, there's very few in Watts, but like compared to what a park is like in the white part of town.
Exactly. Trails and hills.
Open spaces.
Open spaces, yeah.
But yeah, that's that. I recommend watching that if you want better context than I can give for Watts in 1965. And what'd you do?
Well,
what did you do?
Before the protest started, we had some people on Instagram asking if we could. I think we put a pitch out there like
The Brady Bunch.
the Brady.
house.
You posted the Brady Bunch house, and then people were asking for the Golden Girls house, which I got a picture of. I went at night, and then I went back the next day to get a better picture during the day. But I also found Rod Serling's house,
Does it
which
look
I
different
knew
during
was
the day?
in Brentwood. And then we got some more requests and stuff. So I went around taking pictures. I know where the Ennis house is, but we went there. I went to the Double Indemnity house, which I've never been to before, up on Beechwood in Hollywood. It's beautiful.
I went to the Malcolm in the Middle house.
You were telling me about that. When I bring up the Double Indemnity house, you like jump to the opportunity to talk about the Malcolm in the Middle house.
This is my double indemnity. I can't be convicted twice for breaking into the Malcolm in the Middle house. They tore down the Malcolm in the Middle house, so it's just like some, it
where
looks
was
like
that?
the house from Parasite now, which could also be the name of the show. It's like a street or two up south of Ventura Boulevard where like the Barnes and Noble is. It's right there.
Okay, cool.
It's a really nice street.
Yeah.
Again, I've talked about how much I want to live in that neighborhood, and the more I learn about the world, the less I see that's going to be possible.
I'm going to be very comfortable in apartments for the rest of my life.
I don't know about comfortable. There's a whole bunch of houses I'd like to
Rob.
Yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? B&E. I know there's a lot just in like this neighborhood.
You know what I did the other day? This could be a thing we were talking about last episode about the Strand in Santa Monica, and I was talking about that really, like, there's a street by the Strand that's I call it like Noir Alley, because it's just like, so I wanted to go there. It's let me look it up real quick. But I was inside all day reading, and I sometimes if I do that, I like throw a fit. It's the one, Casa del Mar is right there on the coast. That's a really beautiful hotel.
That's the old Synanon headquarters.
Yeah, that's the old Synanon headquarters, and then like there's a street beside it.
Yeah,
and that's
okay.
true. I think
that is Noir Alley, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I think it's Aparian Way or something.
I think it's Noir Alley
or Apopian Way.
Appian? Isn't the Appian Way the road that leads into Rome? How do you know that?
Because it just came up when I was searching for it.
I was really impressed for a second.
Wow.
That's actually pretty smart of you.
Wow, that's not an old TV show. How do you know about it?
Was there like an episode of I Love Lucy where they took the Appian Way?
Why are you like this? Yeah, but that's the street. So I took a walk down there. Yeah, it's incredible. Because the street is such a mix of beautiful houses and kind of like grimy beach people.
Yeah. Well,
that's the high and the low that they're always talking about in Noir.
Tell them what else happened to you when you were at the beach that fateful night when you went into the water.
Oh my God, that was a different day.
Oh, great. So you returned to...
There was one morning where I woke up. I don't know. I wake up sometimes. I'm like, I just get in the car and I go. I just like, I don't know. I woke up with like need for speed, baby. I went to Redondo Beach and I was just going to eat breakfast in the bed of my truck like this.
Beside my rocking
the
chair.
ocean. And I went.
I installed a grill.
And beaches hadn't opened up yet. So like you could only go from your car directly into the ocean. You couldn't stop on the way, which is fine by me. I didn't really care. The water was so beautiful. It was such a nice day. I'm like, you know what? I'm wearing shorts right now. I have a towel here somewhere. I'm going to run, jump in the ocean, come back to my car. I put 22 minutes in the meter and I like hustle down. I skip sunscreen and I walk and I'm going into the water about waist deep. The water feels so good. I'm about to go further and I see a gray fin pop out of the water and go back down. And like I said before, teleporting, I was just back on the sand. I didn't even realize that I ran away.
Because you were trying to justify it to me of, it was probably a dolphin. And then the next day I saw like tons of great white shark sightings around the coast of Los Angeles.
The scariest shark that you'll come across.
You know, the
right
one
where you
that's
were.
the reason you're afraid of sharks? And this is the one from the movie.
But to my defense, I still went in. I still
That's not a good defense.
doused my body in water, even though I was sure that the next wave, it's going to be in the water to come get me.
The next wave would have been the shark.
Yeah, for sure.
Why does this wave have teeth? You're trying to pitch this to me as like, but I still went in. That's just making me want to go in less. Like, your experience is everything I'm afraid of.
I'm fine. Nothing happened to me. Why I'm telling you that I still went in is to show you that I was scared and I still did it and I'm fine. A lesson that you could learn one day.
No. If something bad could happen to me, don't do it. That's the moral here.
I'm finding out more and more that there are less people than I thought that actually like going in the water.
Really?
Yeah.
Could have
I'm
fooled
one
me.
of a rare breed.
I operate under the assumption that everyone's exactly like me, so I don't know.
You sure do. Until they do something different, you're like, why are they wrong?
Okay, so now let's get to this month. We have listener question.
Okay.
This one is from Emilio. What's the dealio on Instagram? Not Emilio. It's a completely different person. So his question on Instagram is, do you two talk about LA differently than before you started the podcast?
Yeah, I know I for sure do, because when I talked about things around town, it was always like crime or death related. Like, this is where the Hillside Strangler dumped a body. This is where Night Stalker got caught. This is where the Manson family lived. Now it's that still, but also like this is where the original settlers decided they wanted to build a river.
And then the Night Stalker found them.
Yeah, as we stack more and more information,
I've found I've more and more become the person driving the car who's like, that's the building where there was an old pet clinic.
Yeah.
And Judy Garland had a pet that got sick there. I like to point out stuff, especially to people coming in from out of town. I've become the point out guy.
The generous people will call it a tour guide. Real people will call it mansplaining, and that's fine.
No, it's not mansplaining if you explain it to other men. if you explain to other men.
Well, yeah, when people will message us like, hey, what should we do when we come? I have like better options than like, here's a place where a bunch of people got killed in the 50s. Like,
but it could happen to you too. Even in terms of looking at current events, like now that we know more about what's happened in the history, I find being like, yeah, well, what did you expect from fill in the government agency? What did you expect from the sheriff's department, the LAPD,
the law enforcement agency that's responsible for this? I think that I'm becoming more preservation minded now that we've done so much history, and I'm like, oh wow, all this stuff that we talked about is gone, and all these people are moving here. We're having all these apartment complexes come up. My brain is more actively thinking about ways to fight to keep things.
Yeah, to coin a phrase, it does put in perspective that time is a flat circle, because you talk about like more people coming here, like, oh, this happens every 20 years. There's a huge debate about we don't have enough houses for these 40 people who live here.
Turns out a bunch of people die, and it's fine. So
we're well informed.
Yeah,
I would say we're
more informed, but somehow just as stupid as we were before.
Wiser, but still stupid.
Still massively unintelligent and insensitive, and sometimes very tone deaf. And for that, we apologize. We literally giggle at everything, bad or good.
Okay, let's get into the current events right now.
Okay.
But let's start with that, because this episode, it's probably going to sound different because both of us are angry, both of us are depressed, and we're upset about what's going on right now.
Yes. But not just what's going on now, but having
what
done
has
research,
been going on. Times of
maybe a century of.
Well, if you want to look at a bigger picture, 400 years.
Well, I was specifically talking about the police department, but yeah, you're right.
We are not historians.
No.
We are who we are. We're stupid people, and we cope with things a lot of times by making fun of things.
Yeah.
We joke around on this show. If you're listening to us, you know that. You like that. You like that, don't you?
I'll learn to like it, as most traumatized kids will. But I'll just learn to adapt to that.
What'd you just say? There's no trauma in this podcast. No traumatized kids allowed. But
don't bring your trauma here, pal.
Don't bring your old trauma here. This is a place for fresh trauma.
This is a place for giggles.
I know that we've gotten complaints in the past from people who have just like dipped into the podcast of like, you're talking about this murder and you're laughing about stuff. First of all, I think we've made we don't make fun of victims, but true, we make light of situations that could seem insensitive, or what was the word you were using?
Tone deaf. Dismissive.
Hang on. I asked for one term that you were using. But yeah, I mean, for that, we do apologize. We don't mean to offend anybody. Like, we certainly don't think anything that's going on right now is funny, or someone being murdered is funny, unless it's a really bad person. This sort of thing, we don't find it funny, but to cope with it, we might make fun of the situation surrounding it, which is like, it's ridiculous. The situation is ridiculous. Yep. Yeah, I don't know. We don't mean to offend anybody, but we also, I can't can't look at things from such a serious lens because I'll go insane.
Yeah,
like it'll
exactly.
kill me.
Yeah, I went through like a couple weeks on and off of just like slop brain.
Yeah.
Like my brain was
my
just
my
like
brain is
slop.
mush. One little thing happening and then just screaming about like everything and then just
And that scream exhausts me for days.
exactly. Anyway, I just want to say we don't mean to offend anybody.
Yeah. How's it
Except
going?
for that
They
car that just drove by. Hey, car.
Hey, do you have microphones in there?
Let's just go into it with that in mind. I think this is going to be a different sort of episode, but still, if anything ever crosses the line, we apologize.
We're completely unaware of what we're doing.
Yeah, I go into a fugue state when the record button gets hit.
I wake up, I have blood in my mouth, I'm in the bushes, there's a deer next to me.
And the theme from Cabaret is in my head for some reason. This month we're going to get into, we'll talk a little bit at the end about what's been going on for the past month in terms of the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in the city. But we're going to talk about
Two of the biggest
civil
unrests in the
civil
city.
unrest.
That you thought, wow, things will never be the same again. Turns out they could just reset.
I know. Things will certainly be better after this. I'm going to go into Watts, 1965. You're going to do
1992, South Central.
I have avoided the term riots.
It's typically referred to as the uprising or the rebellion, which I'm totally for.
We'll talk more
Mine's
about
a riot.
Yeah.
When I was posting
deaf.
pictures for when we wanted to acknowledge the protests were happening and we were in full support, it's easy to find pictures of the Watts, like the aftermath, and be like, community coming together.
Yeah.
Nobody really looks good in 1992. Not a lot of photos of people being like, oh, good job.
Look, let's get into let's start it out.
Okay,
we're going
good.
back. What is it? What was 1965? That was 50. What was that?
60-ish
55 years ago.
Let me look that up. Calculate that.
Yeah, look up the time minus time calculator.
I have 2020 minus 1965.
If we can't do the math
is-
right now, we should be stripped of our podcast.
I can't do math ever.
It's 55 years. Let's get it started here. We're already 30 minutes in or whatever, and you've just been talking on and on about how much you want me to get eaten by sharks.
I don't want it. I just want you to be okay with it.
I don't want it. You want it. Time for a real high voltage story. A full 1965 watts. That is.
Oh my God. Again, every time you do the first opening sentence, I'm just picturing like brainstorm charts on the wall.
I cracked open the old homonym dictionary. Okay, so for a lot of people, read white. What happened in 1965 in Watts seemed like it came out of nowhere.
Right.
So before we get into what did happen, let's first take a quick overview of what that community was going through at the time. Like I was talking about, you can watch Felicia. If you don't want to hear me, pop in Felicia right now. Pop in your VHS of Felicia right now. Between 1940 and 1965, the black population in LA went from 75,000 in 1940 to, in 1965, 650,000 people.
That's a giant
That's
jump.
a huge population. Let's do the math calculator on
my
that.
God.
That's 25 years. That's like twice the age of me. That's 650,000. That's like half your age. Most of these people were living in South LA.
Okay.
Because of the racial housing covenants for most of that period and just racial racism, they couldn't spread out around the city like everyone else who came here did. They all had to cram into this one section of town. We talked about that in our Central Avenue episode more about how I think it was Hattie McDaniel kind of like broke down the housing covenants, and I forget what neighborhood it was.
She lived in
It was like
West Adams, or
it was something like that. She was like the first black person, and she's like, well, I have money, I'm moving here.
Yeah.
Like, why would you
I won an Academy Award. I think I'm going to move. We also talked about, Mariah in the La Plaza field trip talked about, was it redlining? I don't remember.
I don't know.
We'll skip that.
Again, we've talked about so much history. Everything's blending into one.
Exactly,
Whatever she said, I said.
Yep.
So there was the Rumford Fair Housing Act, but that protected black residents from housing discrimination. So this was a good thing. But in 1964, 1 year before what we're going to be talking about, and the same year that the Civil Rights Act was passed, California passed Prop 14 with 65% of the vote, which nullified this housing act. So once again, housing restrictions were enforced. So California went out of their way to make sure that black people had to live in certain parts of town.
It's called segregation, yeah.
Wait, what's that term you were using before? Tone deaf? In Watts in particular, it was technically an integrated part of town, but de facto segregation was still in full effect.
Right.
This is illustrated by the fact that 99% of the kids in the schools there were black, and you could bet the schools weren't up to par with schools in the white parts of town.
Right.
So 2/3 of the people living there never graduated high school. Even the homes in Watts were run down. Only 13% of the houses there were younger than 25 years old, like me.
Sorry, I was listening to the birds for a second. I'm like, are they getting louder? And then I turned to catch you talking about how you're an infant penis or whatever.
There were hundreds of homicides a year in and around Watts at this time. So this is what's going on. On top of that, LA was the only major city in the U.S. at the time with an anti-poverty program.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
Without. Yeah.
Got it.
This isn't a good thing. This is a bad thing. It was the only one without an anti-poverty program that might have helped make this situation better. That means just like money from the federal government to help these schools maybe to not have a 2/3 of the people dropping out of high school.
Right.
Not only did we not have that, the city refused the federal government's money when they offered to pay for it. They said, we do not want that.
Did it stink of communism? And they're like, we don't do that here.
The excuses that Chief Parker makes afterwards.
Parker?
Yeah.
Parker?
I
hate him. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like in the past we might have, in certain respects, like, he seems like a good guy.
Well, he reformed the police after they were corrupt for so many years, but he did that by turning them into the military.
Yeah.
And then basically...
Don't be corrupt against each other. Be corrupt against one
people.
Particular group.
Yeah.
So with the city actively ignoring this community, it's no surprise that there were years and years of incidents and crimes against black people perpetrated by the government, in specific the LAPD. Mm-hmm. Police Chief William H. Parker sought to make the city safer by being proactive and stopping crime, which intentionally or not, but knowing Parker probably intentionally, it translated to harassing a lot of black men on the street.
Yeah.
Just going up, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Well, I was reading, there's a really good book called Policing Los Angeles, and they talk a lot about his ideologies and stuff. And one of them was like, we have such a broad space to cover, and we only have so many cops. It's like one cop for every 200 arrests, something ridiculous like that. So he says
cop
like
for every girl.
And he says like backup might be like minutes away or even longer. So if you see someone that looks like a suspect, you get out, you get them, and you put them in the car, and then you go. And it's like, okay, well, that's racial profiling.
Yeah.
That's harassment.
We have precogs downtown. It's fine. We know what we're doing. So in just the few years leading up to 1965, which is the date, or the year, in 1961, a black man was arrested in Griffith Park for riding the merry-go-round without a ticket. To the city's credit, though, when this was happening, a group of people at the merry-go-round started throwing rocks and bottles at the cops to leave this guy alone.
I heard about that,
He's riding the merry-go-round.
Disney's merry-go-round. The one where he has a bench that was like, I used to sit here.
In 1962, the LAPD raided a Nation of Islam mosque and killed an unarmed black man inside. This also led to protests in 1963 and 64. 65 black men in total were killed by the LAPD. 27 were shot in the back. 25 of those were unarmed. In 1964, the LAPD investigators only disciplined officers in 3 out of 42 alleged brutality cases. Parker. To the city's credit again, during these 2 years, there were 250 demonstrations against the LAPD in those 2 years, 1963 and 64.
We'll get into how he felt about civil rights.
Did he ever go on and say, sorry, I was ever insensitive? We're better than Parker. In covering these incidents and the incidents like it, the media mostly focused the blame on the victims, of course, and completely ignored the brutality of the LAPD and the racism of the police chief, which thankfully is something that has never happened again. All of this, of course, prompted an Urban League report in 1964 to crown Los Angeles the best city in the United States for black people. I love these government reports that are like, it's perfect. If we figured it out, it's perfect. The government and the media, always on the right side of history and connected to the mood of the people. This was the situation in Watts leading up to August 11th, 1965. It's the early evening of a hot summer day. Very hot.
Very hot.
It's 94 degrees. Picture this.
A lot of people don't have air conditioners.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why people were out on the street.
Yeah.
A little before 7 p.m., a car pulls up to a California Highway Patrol officer on a motorcycle. So the officer on the motorcycle was Lee W. Meekly. He was 31 years old. He was white. I don't know the driver of the car's name that pulled up to him, but he was black. The guy in the car points out to Meekly a 1955 Buick Special that otherwise Meekly would not have noticed. The car was speeding and swerving.
Yeah.
So the man in the car who pulled up, this is already getting confusing.
Yeah.
The man in the car who pulled up to Meekly, he expressed concerns that this was a drunk driver, and being a hot night, there's a lot of people out on the street. He doesn't want anyone getting hit. So Meekly followed the car up El Segundo Boulevard and down Avalon until he finally put on his siren and pulled the car over over near Avalon and 116th in front of the El Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Watts. Driving the car was a 21-year-old man named Marquette Fry. He was born in 1944 in Oklahoma, raised in Hanna, Wyoming. His dad was a sharecropper. His mom, Rena, cleaned houses and did babysitting. In 1957, they moved to LA. I'm not sure if his dad was still in the picture, but Rena continued working, cleaning, and babysitting in Watts. So she was known around the neighborhood as the lady. Everybody, she was like basically everyone's mom.
Everyone's mom, yeah. I like that every neighborhood probably has a lady like that.
Where's
your jacket?
Where's your jacket on this 94-degree night?
I want to make sure you're not wearing it.
So Marquette, he had never experienced racism or even heard the N-word until he moved to LA.
Jeez.
And he eventually dropped out of John C. Fremont High School at age 16. He was involved in a gang for a little bit and kind of just floated from job to job. So he was driving, and in the passenger seat was his stepbrother, Ronald. So Ron was about to go away to join the Army, and Marquette's 2-year parole for strong-arm robbery had just ended. So the two went out to celebrate. They had a few beers. Now they were pulled over for drunk driving, which if you're black or you're not white or you're white and have seen any TV show or movie that addresses systemic racism, you know this is a situation that is not good. This can easily go bad when a white officer pulls over a black driver. So now the exact specifics of what happened next vary depending on anyone you ask, but the general gist of what happened, it's all the same. Everyone knows generally what happens. Marquette gets out of the car, and Meekly had him do a sobriety test, which he failed. Marquette later admitted that he was, in fact, drunk. So Meekly said, "You're under arrest." It was going along without an incident. But since everyone was outside from the heat, a crowd started to gather to watch what was happening. Because in this community, when a white cop pulls over a black driver, it usually didn't end well. So people wanted to keep an eye on the situation. By all accounts, Marquette knew he had been busted, and he knew, like, all right, you caught me. I got busted, but he was also in good spirits.
Right. And he also didn't want to get his car towed, which is the big thing.
Well, his brother, it's all
get into it. Yeah.
There's a million different perspectives of what was exactly going on. He was joking around with the crowd and with the officer as well, whether or not he was doing this out of his personality or just because he knew how bad this sort of encounter with the law enforcement went or could go for people like him. He wanted to purposely put the officer at ease, up for debate.
Right.
But regardless, things were going as smoothly as they could. Now, this is where I read two different things happened. Either it became clear that the car was going to be impounded, so Ronald ran to get their mom, Rena, the lady.
Yes.
Or somebody not related went to get Rena because her kids were being arrested.
Yeah.
That's when the mood of the situation changed. Here, it also splits off into two more things.
Yeah.
One was that Marquette, before his mom got there, started getting sick of the situation because the crowd was growing, and another CHP officer named Bob Lewis got called in by Meekly because he was afraid of the growing crowd. The officers kept questioning Marquette, and they were asking him what his eye color is, what's your hair color, and all that, and he finally said, "My hair is black, my eyes are black, I'm black all over, and I'm proud of it."
That's pretty cool.
What were you going to say?
Why are they still questioning him? Like they already
that's what kind of confused me about this version of the story.
Yeah.
Again, like there's so many different versions of what of the steps of what happened.
Yeah, I failed sobriety test. You got me. I'm not resisting arrest. Why are you still asking me questions? Okay.
Yeah, that could be it, or maybe that's not exactly what happened.
Yeah, okay.
But the other version is that he was going along with everything until his mom showed up and started yelling at Marquette because he was driving drunk. And who first of all, who wants to get yelled at by their mom and also in front of a crowd?
Yeah. That is scarier than being arrested in front of a crowd and your mom yelling. It's just your mom yelling at you in front of a crowd is just
like everything. It just like piled up. Whatever happened, he got upset and he started refusing to go along with what the officers wanted.
Right.
Either way, now what we have are two white officers, Ronald, Rena, and Marquette there, who does not want to be arrested by the officers and a growing crowd of onlookers. So this is when Marquette started yelling that the officers would have to kill him if they wanted to take him away. That was when the CHP officers called for backup from the LAPD, claiming that there was a hostile crowd growing.
Right.
I mean, that's like catnip for the LAPD. This is not a good situation. Again, there was no way at the time to record any of what happened here, so there's a lot of different accounts even further, but something along the lines of this happened. The backup CHP officer, Bob Lewis, tried to hit Marquette on the shoulder with his baton since he was quote-unquote resisting arrest, but he missed and hit him above the eye, which drew blood.
Not a good look.
No, that may or may not have made Marquette collapse, but he seemed to have gotten up and then backed up into Meekly's arms, who then grabbed him, and Ronald, who was trying to protect his brother, punched Meekly in the kidney, and then Rena, to protect both of her sons, jumped on Meekly's back, who then seems to have pulled out his gun.
Okay.
Or she jumped on his back because he pulled out his gun, and he ended up pushing her. Again, it's not. Well, we do know she jumped on someone's back.
Yeah.
A gun was shown. There was pushing. There was brutality.
Yeah.
Either way, Rena was now in handcuffs, and Marquette, to protect his mom, then took a swing at Meekly, which resulted in him also being in handcuffs and Ronald as well, I guess for good measure. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he might have punched the guy. I don't know. So it was now 7:23 in Marquette. Ronald and Rena were under arrest around the same time as the LAPD were arriving. And there was now a crowd of almost 1,000 people watching this whole thing happen. Thank God nobody got killed. Nobody got killed in this situation.
And also a crowd of 1,000.
Yeah.
I'm sure like,
well, it didn't
you can
end
be
here.
so deep. I know that, but
Yeah.
like, you can be so deep that you don't even know what's going on, but you're just responding to the energy of the crowd.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was sort of a thing. You'll see rumors were spreading through the
Yeah.
crowd of what was going on, and just, like a feeling was going through, like, leave us alone.
Yeah.
Like, it's hot. Keep in mind, it's hot. You've
yeah.
seen Do the Right Thing. It's a hot day, and sometimes people just don't want this.
Yeah.
I mean, they never want this, but
Right.
like when it's 94 degrees and you're just trying to stay cool outside, like, leave us alone.
And yeah.
Anyway, those three were forced into a cop car and taken to the station. But now the LAPD was there with the crowd of people who were rightfully angry over just witnessing what ended up being a typical encounter between a black man and a white law enforcement officer, which was filled with unnecessary brutality.
Yes.
No debate. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Rena later claimed she wasn't abused by the cops, but there's no denying Marquette got hit. People were being hit.
Yeah.
And for what? A drunk driving.
A DUI that they pulled him over for before he hit anybody.
Again, I'm getting angry. But those three were out of the picture and the crowd was angry, and the LAPD backup had a long, ugly history with crowds of black people. So they tried to disperse the crowd. By many accounts, they were using racial slurs as their main tactic. And as they were trying to leave, someone in the crowd spat on one of the officers. Right. And an officer went back into the crowd and for whatever reason decided a woman named Joyce Ann Gaines had been the one who spat. So they grabbed her by the hair and threw her on the ground.
Jesus.
Brutality continued. I was thinking, like, I wonder if people should make a donation to a charity every time you spot police brutality in this episode.
Wasn't she pregnant?
Here. Joyce was a hairdresser,
right?
And she was wearing a smock, which for some reason made people think she was pregnant.
Okay.
She wasn't, and I'm sure on top of all these horrible things that were happening, she also didn't appreciate everyone saying she's pregnant. So now word started to spread exactly through the crowd that cops were assaulting a pregnant woman, which made people even angrier. The crowd gathered around Joyce to protect her, and even more cops got called in, and they then arrested another guy who they accused of inciting violence, which is Rich. And apparently at one point there were 10 cops manhandling this one unarmed black man who was already in handcuffs.
Oh my God.
It was now 7:45, and this is basically when the Watts Uprising officially began. 7:45, August 11, 1965. The cops got away with their victims, but the crowd remained, so they came back, the cops, a couple times to try to disperse the crowd.
Right.
And by the third time the cops dared to show their faces again, that's when people started throwing rocks and bottles at them and the other cars that had piled up, because this caused a huge traffic jam.
Right.
Like, this was a small street, so the streets were blocked off. So now people were throwing things at cars.
When they came back? Or just at cars?
Well, first it's the cops
came back a third
time. They came back and they're like, what are you what are you doing here again? So again, the exact details of who hit who and who did what are hard to pick out, but what happened was that a routine traffic violation turned ugly, and the cops, as you can always depend on them to do, were unnecessarily aggressive and violent with a group of black people.
Right.
And now there was a crowd of people who were pissed off and decided then and there that they didn't want to put up with this anymore. That first night, it wasn't too big. I don't think any or many cops, if there were any, were there to try to stop anything, but some windows were smashed, a car was set on fire at Imperial and Avalon. The next morning, though, Rena and her two sons were released from the police station, where they were quickly informed that they had started a revolution. They had no idea, because they were in jail.
Remember how you got drunk last night?
Exactly.
Guess what?
They were in jail, so they had no idea what was happening, and they come outside and they're like, whoa.
Yeah, what are you guys up
Heavy. They had no idea this was happening. That morning, an emergency meeting by the LA County Human Relations Commission was called at Athens Park. Okay. Emergency meeting. In attendance was Rena herself. They had Watts community leaders, representatives from the NAACP, representatives from the LAPD, in addition to just people from the community were there. The purpose of this meeting was supposed to bring calm to the situation and prevent it from escalating. What it became was a much needed venue for the people of Watts and the surrounding community to express their anger and vent their complaints about how their community was being treated by the government. So this was a healthy thing that was going on. Most people were calling for peace and demanding that change be made, but at a certain point during the meeting, a teenager took the microphone and called for more of what happened the night before, and this time said, let's move into the white parts of town and start attacking things. Again,
guess who doesn't like to hear that?
Guess which part of this meeting got covered by the press? Only that. That's all they talked. That's all they talked about. Headline: Black teenagers want to invade Beverly Hills or whatever.
Harry Chandler only covered that. Why?
Notorious Confederate. I don't know if he's a better. Racist. The media ignored the conversation and dialogue that had been going on before this and only reported that a teenager called for attacks on white parts of town.
Right.
That night, things escalated. Cars were flipped over on the street. More businesses were smashed up. This was when looting began. A lot of people were looting just to get things that they needed but couldn't afford. Some people went too far. Emphasis on some people went too far.
Yeah.
A big target were pawn shops because people wanted guns to protect themselves.
Right.
That's why they were going into pawn shops. The cops did nothing to prevent the looting. Molotov cocktails were thrown. Buildings were burned. It was kind of a breaking point where a lot of people felt basically, this is what you've pushed us to.
Yeah.
You know, like people were saying things like, this is what you think of us. This is what the police wanted. Then we'll give you what you think of us.
Yeah.
You know, people were shouting, this is for Selma. There's so much behind this. Others were chanting to get the white man. White drivers were pulled out of their cars and beaten, which is terrifying. Like that as a white man
who drives a car.
I mean, that happened in 1992
Sure
also,
did,
which is unfortunate, but like at the same time, like look
I call
what
it like
pushed
blind
to.
rage.
It's
like
blind rage.
It's almost like everyone's
not entirely blind.
You're right,
But
not entirely blind.
it is rage, and it's not. I mean, I don't even want to say if it's right or wrong, but like, look what they've been pushed to.
Yeah.
I don't even want to judge the situation, except look what they've been pushed to.
Yeah.
You know, Melissa's mom grew up in Watts. She lived in Watts during. Spoiler alert: Melissa's white, and so is her mom. But
since when?
not when I've seen her. I think her mom was like 5 or something at the time, and she was at a friend's house, and her grandma or somebody was like, "You've got to get out of Watts right now." And they all, while this was happening, like snuck out. I think her mom had to like duck in the back of the car, and they drove them and stay. I think their family lived in Long Beach or something like that, and they stayed there for a few days. I mean, no one wanted this. Nobody's happy about this situation. It's horrible. This was all still around the Watts area, mind you. It hadn't spread to the white. That never happened. It never went to the white areas. It was all around Watts. There was no invasion of Beverly Hills or anything like that. 3 different groups put out a bounty on Menikis's head. He lived in Norwalk in his neighbor's guarded house, but as far as I'm aware, nobody ever came. It was just talk. Again, people were just angry. That second night, there were 7,000 people in the streets. This was the first 7,000 people. This was the first night, though, that gunfire started. So things started getting scary. 75 people were injured that night. Only 13 were cops. No deaths yet. Dozens of buildings along Avalon were burned, but when firefighters came to put out the fires, they were shot at to just let the buildings burn. Another chant was "Burn, baby, burn." As people say, burn it all down. Don't try to stop this. And this was just night number 2. The next morning, the police confidently reported that the situation was now well in hand. At 9 a.m., people took back to the streets, and that's when Mayor Sam Yorty called in the National Guard.
Right.
Leaders around L.A., they were urging Chief Parker to send in black officers of the LAPD who maybe would have handled the situation better, but Parker refused because he wanted the National Guard. Governor Brown was in Greece at the time, so the lieutenant governor was in charge. It took him 6 hours to approve the request, another 6 hours for them to arrive in Watts, and boy, did they not help the situation at all.
Some of the scariest footage, because it's at night and the cameras can't capture that far. It's not like deep photography, so like out of the darkness, people are just screaming, and then just men with guns come by.
It's the National Guard. Like, I don't know what they did in the last month. I don't think the National Guard were that brutal here.
No, I don't think so. I think they were just here.
But last time, or not last, second to last time, they were bad. Like, I think they might have caused more damage than the LAPD. They were not good to have around. And I read something about they had a troop of, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but like they had a troop of, an integrated troop of National Guard soldiers in Long Beach who they're like, we could be there in 30 minutes and try to, you know, but Parker or whoever the lieutenant governor was like, no, I want an all-white troop coming from like Fresno or something. Anyway, now there were 13,900 National Guardsmen and almost 2,000 LAPD and county officers in and around Watts. 13,000 for
a contained area. This isn't widespread.
And there were 7,000 people in the streets then. So they wanted, let's triple how many people. So the looting and burning and gunfire continued, but now there were trigger-happy military soldiers involved, and they shot a lot of innocent people. And that third day was when the first death happened. It was a young man. He was caught in the crossfire and killed by the National National Guard. Another guy was leaving a barbershop in 89th and Broadway, got killed by the National Guard. A guy named Charles Pfizer, who was in a doo-wop band called the Olympics that did an earlier version of Good Lovin'. He was on his way to band practice and he got killed.
Oh my God.
They claim that there were snipers shooting from rooftops at the cops.
Right.
There was one at 104th and Wilmington, but I saw a picture and it was one cop ducking behind a car while other cops and passersby were just kind of standing there. So I don't know how much of a sniper this really was, other than just maybe a guy was on a roof shooting at this one cop. I don't know. The National Guard dug trenches at the intersections to keep people inside the area. So now cops were cutting trees on the streets so people couldn't climb up them and throw things from them. There was a sign leading into a stretch of Watts that warned turn left or get shot.
I've seen that sign before.
Yeah, cops were raiding apartment buildings. By the end of the third day, the uprising covered 46.5 square miles. The area of Alameda on the east, Crenshaw on the west, and Rosecrans on the south were essentially under a military lockdown in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The area was in chaos and people were terrified and sleeping on their floor in case bullets came through their windows. Comedian Dick Gregory.
I know Dick Gregory.
He went into the neighborhood to try to
to
calm down the looters, and the cops or the National Guard shot him in the leg, to which he yelled back, "All right, God damn it, you shot me, now go home." So Dick Gregory,
I thought he got shot in the butt.
and maybe it was the upper leg.
Okay,
I don't know.
The upper leg. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny, though. To get shot and be like, I got a zinger for this.
Never go into a gunfight unarmed without a zinger was Dick Gregory's motto. So this third day was by far the worst and wasn't helped by Parker going on the radio saying things like, it is estimated that by 1970, 45% of the metropolitan area of Los Angeles will be Negro. If you want any protection for your home and family, you're going to have to get in and support a strong police department. If you don't, come 1970, God help you.
I believe the word they're using is propaganda.
Or just racism.
Yeah.
That's not even ganda. It's copacism. And also, he was also saying that Muslims were infiltrating the crowds and causing the trouble.
And also, somehow, communists are a problem, too.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
No, he blamed communists later on. He also said that the people in Watts were behaving like monkeys in a zoo. This is what the police chief of Los Angeles said. To calm things down.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
This was his plan. So these charming comments by that charming, rotting sack of mayonnaise, of course, made things worse. And of course, they were repeated over and over by the media. And of course, the voices of the actual people inside of Watts were largely ignored by the media. It wasn't just Watts, though. At the same time, there were demonstrations and uprisings breaking out in Pasadena, Wilmington, Long Beach, Monrovia, and Pacoima at the same time as this. Things continued into a fourth day, which was when an 8 p.m. curfew was put into effect within black neighborhoods, but things were already starting to die down by then. But Parker once again managed to outdo himself when he then summed things up perfectly by saying on the radio, "Now we're on top and they're on the bottom." Some of the things he said, I'm like, oh, you know exactly what you know the problems you're causing, exactly.
His whole thing with law and order, I said in mine, I'll skip it, but his biggest threat to law and order was civil unrest, or like civil rights. He knew exactly where he thought certain people belonged.
Yeah.
A very big philosophy in the great white spot.
A bad system that we've built upon.
Yeah. We keep saying we fixed.
For 55 years after this. So this was Saturday, and by Monday, there were only 252 guardsmen left in the area, and on Tuesday, the curfew was listed, essentially marking the end of the Watts Uprising. Lifted. What did I say? Listed. On August 17th. So it was 6 days it lasted. Okay. But never to miss out on the last atrocity, the LAPD on the 18th surrounded the headquarters of the LA chapter of the Nation of Islam at 5606 South Broadway at 2 a.m. under claims that they were stockpiling weapons. They claimed they came under fire. They didn't, and they started firing back. They tear gassed the sewers so nobody could escape, raided the mosque, arrested 59 people. A fire mysteriously broke out, and the mosque burned down. Mm-hmm. No guns were found, so...
Weird.
Yeah, interesting.
Hey, did you hear that they were stockpiling guns? I did hear that.
They stockpiled them so well you can't even see them. I guess the tear gas must have melted them. Like I said, the uprising lasted 6 days. At the end of that, 34,000 people had been involved in one way or another with this. Over 600 buildings were looted or burned. 200 buildings were destroyed completely. Entire blocks were burned down. 103rd Street became known as Charcoal Alley because it was just a smoldering stretch of rubble. The Salvation Army was giving out meals to families at Markham Middle School. There were $40 million in damages, making it the most expensive uprising uprising of the civil rights era. It was more destructive than the 7 uprisings on the East Coast from the year before combined. Unfortunately, it was also more violent than those ones. Over 3,500 people were arrested, mostly for burglary or theft. 132 people were injured. 118 of those were shot and 34 were killed. So of the killed people, one was a firefighter who died when a wall collapsed on him. One was a sheriff who died of friendly fire, and one was a cop who was shot. That means 31 out of the 34 people that died were black. 26 were deemed justifiable homicides, and 23 of those were at the hands of the LAPD and the National Guard. And what about the rest? Were any officers or soldiers brought to trial? No. Not that I saw. None of them. Anyway,
it's a wartime rule where we got to kill people and it's not a crime.
They're not Americans. They're enemies because the National Guard was here. As to that raid on the Nation of Islam headquarters, a judge pressed no charges and blamed it on the imagination of the LAPD, which is kind of like, you get it, right? So why aren't you punishing them?
Yeah.
Parker refused to go before a committee to explain why that raid on the Nation of Islam happened. Once it was all over...
It's great when you think you're above the law and above explanations.
Well, when you are the law, you are above the law.
Yeah, when you are the law, you can step on that little stool and be above the law.
You can make whatever law you want.
Yeah.
Once it was all over, black people knew what happened, but white people struggled to understand. So they did what white people do best, and they formed a committee. It was called the Macon Commission, and they published a 101-page report that confirmed what the people of Watts had been trying to tell them the entire time the cause was racism. Took 101 pages. The report blamed unemployment, bad housing, bad school, recognized the deeper causes of the riots.
They've also seen Felicia.
Yeah, right. Like they would ever. Well,
is Clark Gable in this one?
I know. Is Clark Gable another Confederate soldier in this one? So they recognized the deeper causes of the riots, which we'll get into a little bit more, and suggested improving the local public services and schools and healthcare and job training and public transit and all sorts of things governments like to promise and never follow through with. And sure enough, they never followed through with it. Los Angeles seemed to just kind of ignore this report. Instead, Chief Parker said none of this would have happened if the LAPD hadn't been handling the black community this whole time with, as he put it, kid gloves. So if only they were rougher with them.
Yeah, you're clearly not seeing what the problem is, and no communication.
I mean, he sees the problem every day when he looks in the mirror to put on his Dapper Dan hair gel or whatever.
I hate Phil Parker.
He saw Watts as an act of war, and furthermore blamed Muslims and the commies. In regards to the growing black community and what he apparently saw as his city, he said, "We didn't ask for you." That was his response.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he said about the influx in the black community. "We didn't ask for you." An elected official said that. He went on the news afterwards saying how right his LAPD was in their behavior, and he got a lot of support.
Yeah. Of course.
One step higher than Parker, Mayor Yorty said police brutality was a lie. The white people in the city were inclined to agree with these two mayonnaise dumps. They were blaming it on black men with criminal records, black Muslims, black gang members, and it caused a lot of white people to be even more scared of their black neighbors, who, as a reminder, weren't even allowed to live next to them anymore.
Yeah, they're not my neighbors.
Exactly. They're my neighbors in concept, but within like a 10-mile radius, no. And boy, did white people buy a lot of guns after this. Big spike in guns bought by white people.
No surprise.
No. Again, we talk about time as a flat like this is exactly what we see. The LA Times, meanwhile, got a Pulitzer Prize for their The View from Watts 7-part series coverage that came out a couple months later. Like I was telling you, one guy, one modern reader of it was like, you didn't get it. You didn't get anything that was going on. Why did you get a Pulitzer for this? On the other hand, though, this did at least spur the Times to hire some black reporters. But like I said, none of the reforms that were suggested were implemented in the city. In 1966, the city even voted down a proposal to build a hospital near Watts, which meant that there wasn't a hospital within 8 miles of Watts. Statewide, the uprising had more of an effect, surprisingly, when in 1966, Prop 14 got deemed unconstitutional and was repealed. So now the racial housing covenants are again illegal.
We're real this time.
Yeah. The downside of this, though, was that this helped Reagan get elected governor under a promise that he would never let something like Watts happen again. So everyone, please,
anything.
The Gipper, give me the Gipper. But this
tell me more about jelly beans or whatever.
Yeah, I'll vote for Vice President Jellybean.
I hate Reagan too.
But
go ahead.
This was the white side of the aftermath that we were just talking about. On August 17th, the last day of the uprising, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to town.
When he comes to Los Angeles, I always get like, oh, he was here? What did he say? Where was he? What did he eat?
That's what I was thinking of, like, wow, this will change things. But listen what happened. He wanted to see with his own eyes what had gone on in Watts, but he wasn't entirely welcomed by neither the white or the black communities.
Really?
He gave a speech to a black crowd in Westminster, and they were heckling him because there was a feeling that after what they had all been through the previous 6 days and what they had been going through, they felt like there was a disconnect between their experience and what Martin Luther King was saying.
Right.
He was being diplomatic and trying to get things done through the government, but people were angry,
Yeah.
and they didn't want to get things done that way. And they were feeling the change being promised by this man who, to many of them, felt like just another figurehead. Like they didn't
Right.
believe in that anymore.
Yeah. He's
So-
a guide, not a movement.
and he also, like, he's not a politician, but to them, he kind of was like, you're just one of them.
Yeah.
Like, you're saying you're fighting for us, but how come we're still suffering?
Right.
The people at this meeting didn't want to hear what he had to say. They wanted to be talking to Chief Parker and to Mayor Yorty. And okay, he promised the crowd that he would get those two to come down to talk to them. And he said, I know you will be courteous to them, to which they all laughed uproariously.
Oh, boy.
Martin Luther King, he said that the problem here was environmental and not racial. The economic deprivation, social isolation, inadequate housing, and general despair of thousands of Negroes teeming in northern and western ghettos are the ready seeds which gave birth to tragic expressions of violence, which was true, but people didn't want explanations.
Yeah.
They wanted change.
Yeah.
He never got Parker and Yorty to come down to talk face to face to the people of Watts, but he himself did have a closed door meeting with Yorty where apparently Yorty yelled at Martin Luther King Jr.
Wow.
Dr. Martin Luther, he got yelled at by the white mayor of Los Angeles, and he refused the idea of a civilian police review board. Yorty later said that Martin Luther King did a great disservice to the people of LA and the nation. So in LA, he wasn't able to bring much of an effect, but he said that this uprising was the beginning of a stirring of those people in our society who have been passed by the progress of the last decade. This was a different sort of fight than what was going on in the South at the time, which Martin Luther King was getting stuff done there.
Yeah.
In the South, he was organizing people for rights, but in the North, the struggle was for dignity and work. Like, we had the law, except for the housing thing, like the laws were behind them, but not in spirit at all. I think it was Malcolm X. He compared white racism between the North and the South as the Southern wolf who will bare his teeth at you and growl, but there's also the Northern fox who will smile while he destroys you behind your back. So that was the difference in the fight going on.
Right.
What he saw here did help Martin Luther King to organize the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to march north. So this did inspire him to do, the big thing. He also spoke with President Johnson after this and recommended a federal anti-government, which would be great, a federal anti-poverty program for the city, which we know LA would refuse. And he also got Johnson to launch a nationwide poverty relief program because of what he saw in Watts. But of course, most of the funding for this was diverted the second the Vietnam War started.
Jeez.
Yeah. So obviously everyone had a different experience and view of what happened in Watts. It's no question in the year 2020 what the subtext of Watts was, but back then and still today, there's confusion about why such violence would erupt, and far be it from the whitest of the two white boys talking right now to be explaining that, but I'm in this deep and I need to sometimes...
I'm on my last page.
Just give me a couple more. One of the most common things you'll hear regarding what happened in Watts is this: why would you want to destroy your own neighborhood? That was the common complaint. To that, I answer your question with another question. How can you destroy your own neighborhood when that neighborhood was never yours?
Yeah.
They weren't attacking themselves because they were rarely even given the opportunity to actually take ownership in the neighborhood. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Very few businesses in Watts were black owned, and the ones that were, aside from maybe a couple, were untouched during all of this. People were looting and burning white businesses almost exclusively.
Yeah.
The few black businesses, just like today, they boarded up and put up signs that were saying black owned, and most community buildings also were untouched because that's for us.
Yeah.
Not only were they white businesses that were being attacked, but they were also places that were notorious for taking advantage of black customers. Furniture stores that were charging high prices for low quality furniture. Supermarkets that were known for selling rotten food. On top of that, a lot of the damage was actually outside of Watts proper. So if you want to get pedantic with me, let's do it. I'm ready.
It's someone else's neighborhood.
You want to get into boundaries of cities? Let's do it. But yes, Watts was hurt bad from the uprising, and it took a long time to recover. But what was Watts even before this?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, recover to what? It was already bad.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't want to go back to that, which is why in the years following this, a lot of people in the community took it upon themselves to get involved politically and in the community to create the change that they wanted to see. A lot of young black people became Black Panthers. A lot of gang members, like you were saying, they started using their power in the community to help out community programs.
A lot of those things were for youth, for young kids.
Yeah, they're not going to help us. Let's help ourselves.
Yeah.
Even though today Watts is mostly Latino, there are way more community changes that happen because of the uprising, but there's still a lot of problems going on there right now. But let's not forget that all this started between two people. Meekly, the CHP officer, stayed at his job until 1986. He later defended that he was just doing his job, but also that he should not have arrested him. But he also felt like he had to because he already said he was going to, and he didn't want to be seen as going back on his word, which I don't want to defend cops in this, but like that's the problem right there. You don't want to lose face, so you're going to hit this guy over the head.
Continue down this dark path.
Exactly. He and Marquette actually met up a few times afterwards to discuss what had happened. One feeling that the two shared, though, was that neither of them wanted to be looked at as the one who started the so-called Watts riots.
Right.
They didn't want that.
Who does? Yeah.
Exactly. Who would want that title? For Marquette, this was a much more damaging legacy, though. After this, he was seen by the black community either as a hero or he was a troublemaker, but he didn't want to be seen as either of them.
Yeah.
He had done nothing wrong to warrant the treatment he got, and he had done nothing heroic other than being made an example of unwillingly.
Yeah.
And the label of hero or villain put a lot of pressure on him. He didn't want to be associated with any of it. He, along with many of his family members who got hassled after this, changed his last name to his mom's maiden name and also went by a new first name. So now he wasn't Marquette Fry, he's Marcus Price now. He wasn't an activist. He didn't know much about Martin Luther King or the whole civil rights movement until after all this happened. He wasn't trying to make a point to the police that day. He was just standing up for himself. He said, all I knew that day is that I was tired of being treated bad by a policeman. That's it. But he ended up being used as a symbol by black activists and was often expected to come and say something profound at a civil rights rally, which he deeply resented that. He would be invited to parties by rich black families in Baldwin Hills so that they could show him off. Like, look at my friend.
My God.
He didn't want this. Of course he wanted to fight for change, but as he put it, not just as the dude who started the Watts Uprising.
Yeah.
He wanted to do it on his own terms. I wanted to see something good come of it all, but some things never change. Meanwhile, his life continued to not be easy. He stayed in Watts the rest of his life and stayed involved in the community. Apparently, there's an eagle at the 109th Street Elementary School that's painted by him, which would be cool to find. Parts of the community were very protective of him in terms of who they would let bother him for interviews. Like, I read one thing of a guy who would interview him over the years, and they'd like blindfold the guy, bring him into this building, and Marcus would be in the building and he'd talk to him.
He's just at work.
Yeah. Because of his role in all this, he got red flagged by both the LAPD and the FBI. He was constantly being monitored, and he got arrested 39 times over the rest of his life for a slew of minor things. One time he was accused of plotting to kill Hubert Humphrey.
All right.
It's that patented imagination of the LAPD. On top of that, oftentimes when the cops found out who he was in jail, they would abuse him. They'd beat him in jail because they'd be like, oh, you're the guy. You're the guy. He ended up having to move around from job to job. He suffered from seizures that he believed were caused by that hit in the head. His girlfriend was actually pregnant the day the uprising started, and maybe the worst part, it's so horrible, the worst part of this whole story is that when his daughter was told about the Watts Uprising in school, she was taught that her dad was a bad man.
Oh, jeez.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
That's what she was taught in school. In 1970, he had a son. It just gets worse. In 1970, he had a son who died before he was even a year old. This was when Marcus stabbed himself in the chest, seppuku style.
Wait.
Tried to kill himself.
Oh, he tried
to kill himself, but he didn't, though.
Okay.
He developed a drinking problem after this, died of pneumonia Christmas Eve, 1986. So he didn't live much longer. His mom, Rena, got a $250 fine and 2 years probation for her unbelievably minor role in all of this. But it did get reversed in 1966, a year into her probation. But she also had to deal with the legacy of this because nobody would hire her to clean their houses or watch their kids after this because of her association. She lived a long life until 2013. She died at the age of 97. She never got her car back from the impound because the fees surpassed the worth of her car. And it's a nice, like, I looked up what those cars look like. That's a nice car.
It is a nice car.
The black community has always seen it this way, but I think now is a good time for everybody else to take a new look at what happened in Watts and to stop thinking of it the way it was depicted by the media and by Parker. Yes, it was horrible, and yes, it was scary, but it was scary for everybody. Like I said, everybody was scared. And 6 days of fear to the rest of the city is nothing compared to, like we said, 400 years and counting of what the black community has had to deal with. So the community was calling for help, and they tried talking, but nobody was listening.
Yeah.
So people felt...
And the problem continues.
So people felt that this sort of action maybe would get people to listen. Maybe if we are violent, they will listen. Those first few days of the uprising were a thrill to young black kids in Watts who felt like they finally had power and they were finally hitting back.
And also, like, no one's listening. Now you can hear us.
We'll talk a little bit about what's going on today.
Yeah.
And looting sucks, but when people were looting and damaging stuff, that's when stuff was getting done.
Exactly.
Like now, people are still going, but like, what's happening? People aren't really listening anymore. Anyway, yes, some things maybe got a little more destructive than expected, but again, they had tried playing by the rules, but the rules were wrong.
Yeah.
So don't play by the rules. It brought the reality of being black in America crashing into the living rooms of white LA, which was a city that thought racism was just a delicacy of the South.
Yeah.
Like, we don't do that. This was an outcry against how hopeless it felt to live in Watts and be black and needing help, but the entire system that made a big fuss about justice for all has failed you. There was enough of that. Obviously, for a guy like me who can't even go on walks during quarantine without getting sunburned, the reality of being black in America is something I'll never experience, but what people are asking for is really not hard to understand for anybody. And if you're the kind of person who's afraid of things like the Watts Uprising happening again, it's simple. Make people feel like they're actually an equal part of the structure of society, and they won't attack the structure.
Yes.
It's that simple. As Marcus said, Watts was not a riot because a riot was a bunch of crazy folk going crazy without a reason. There was a reason.
Yes.
Simple.
Absolutely.
But again, like, nothing happened from that. Maybe longer down the line, but not really.
The black community and law enforcement should have like looked at each other and been like, this can't happen again. We need to like get on equal grounds. And it just like, Parker,
happen.
why would Parker ever have that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do that again, but bigger.
Different clothes. Yeah. For research for this one, I kind of went all over the place. If somebody wants any of the LA Times articles that I referenced, they're all bookmarked. I didn't list them in here. I read Policing Los Angeles from Max Faulkner Cantor, LA Noir from John Bunton, which is the Mickey Cohen, Bill Parker book.
I read the part you were telling me to read about Watts in the LA Noir.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
It's a great book. It's very pro-Parker, and it gets me very riled up, and then it goes and it's pro-Cohen for a while. I just find that.
I always wanted Mickey Cohen to be mayor.
I watched a lot of documentaries. LA 92 is fantastic. Let It Fall 1982-1992 is a really good documentary. Burn, Mother Effer, Burn. Really good. It covers Watts all the way to the LA riots. And then the second episode of OJ Made in America covers some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Here we go. It's truly hard to find a place to start talking about the 1992 riots because, as a lot of people know, watching the three spectacular documentaries, it doesn't start with Rodney King being pulled over, nor does it start when the verdict for his beating was announced. We can say that after the Watts Rebellion, the relationship between law enforcement and black community was only continued down their tumultuous path. Police department doubled down on their idea of law and order, and to Bill Parker, one of the biggest threats to law and order was, like I said, civil rights activism and communism, which he felt would undermine social order. What a dweeb-fashioned guy.
What a symbol of his time.
Like I was saying before, his philosophies were all problematic. He believed in loyalty to the badge, which helps foster the police code of silence. He was data-driven, meaning more statistically, according to his intelligence, more crimes were committed by people of color. He felt the need... I'll wait for that to pass. They're on
Case in point, an LAPD
Did you say Parker
helicopter.
too much?
Is someone talking about us in a negative light?
He was data-driven, meaning he was thinking more statistically, and according to his intelligence, more crimes were committed by people of color. He felt he needed to lay the law down extra hard when it came to certain ethnic groups, and he wasn't concerned with why certain groups committed crime. He was only interested in maintaining order. All of that, to me, spells police brutality aimed directly towards people of color, and the police will defend it and defend each other doing it. He was quoted as saying, "The current soft attitude on the part of the public to crime and civil rights demonstrations could lead to a form of anarchy unless halted." He also said, "The voice of the criminal, the communist, and the self-appointed defender of civil liberties constantly cries out for more and more restrictions upon police authority."
He's such a, like, you're all soft. We're treating you with kid gloves. He's such a football coach of a dad. I hate this guy.
Yeah, he's such a stiff white dude.
Yeah.
All through the 70s, the LAPD, along with the FBI and the Sheriff's Department, would continually raid and attack civil rights groups, such as we were talking about the Black Panthers, all part of something referred to as COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. So they'd be raiding, spying, and infiltrating to dismantle in the least, possibly assassinating and wrongful imprisonment at the worst. I'd hate to ruin a further episode, but Bunchy Carter. A place to start talking about all of this is to talk about Bill Parker's predecessor, his protege, his heir apparent, Daryl Gates. Gates joins the force in 1949 and quickly rose up the ranks, and by 1963, he became the head of the LAPD's intelligence division, and in 1965, he became one of the youngest inspectors in the history of the LAPD. During the first calls for backup during the Watts Uprising, Gates was heading over to check on the security at the Harvey Aluminum Company plant on 190th and Normandy to check on the workers' strike. That's when he got the call to go check out what was happening on 116th and Avalon. Daryl Gates was one of the cops on the scene there.
I think I remember reading that name, actually. Interesting.
One of his contemporaries in the LAPD when he was coming up was future mayor, the guy who usurped Yorty, Tom Bradley, and the two did not like each other. I mean, nobody in the equation liked each other, but Bradley and Gates didn't like each other.
Within the greater dislike, these two specifically didn't like each other.
These two didn't like each other. Bradley left the force in 1961 when he ran and was elected for city council. According to the Alley Noir book from Bunton, Bradley was a favorable lieutenant to Parker. He really valued the job he was doing, from sharp police work to handling positive press of the department, but it turned sour after Parker was clued in to a series of negative articles in the Alley Sentinel, and he found out that they were linked to Bradley. Parker had put an eye on Bradley, and a report came back to him saying that Bradley was providing dissident groups like the ACLU at a meeting at a private residence with unfavorable information about Parker and the LAPD. Basically, to sum up, that a lack of understanding brought police hostilities, and that while there was integration to the police academy and a sense of fairness, once you became an officer and went into the field, white cops got a better sense of pronouncement and actions, and cops that weren't white, they didn't. And that made white officers feel more superior, and it left cops who weren't white feeling disenfranchised.
So even within
the police
the force that is enforcing these racist hierarchies, they too have a
subgroup of segregation and racism.
This is a 20-tiered wedding cake. This whole country.
Bradley's remarks about the LAPD, not wildly aggressive, but to Parker, he saw this as outright treachery. He immediately transferred Bradley to the Wilshire Division graveyard shift, but Bradley was already on his way out, so he left. He went on to city council and was elected mayor in 1973, becoming the first African-American mayor in a major U.S. city, which we covered him in a previous episode. Standing next to Bill Parker when he read the report about Bradley was Daryl Gates on his way up the LAPD ladder. 5 years after Bradley became the mayor, Gates becomes chief of police, 1978. He continues the LAPD in Bill Parker's model, a militaristic, hard-nosed police force where handshakes with citizens on one side of town were as common as excessive brutality on the other side of town. So let's set the scene. 1992. It isn't easy, but there are always these factors that are brought up when discussing everything that led up to the riots. In my trusty LA encyclopedia, there were a lot of underlying factors that helped churn the pot of what happened in 1992. When you were bringing it up, explosion of violence in LA, the high unemployment rates, failed education system, racism and alienation in the culture, along with poor police community relations, poor police preparation, and decades of neglect and physical deterioration of South Central.
Well, didn't we talk about in another episode that in that time, wasn't LA like the murder capital of the country? Or I think it was the bank robbery capital.
I think it was a bank robber capital for a long time.
Yeah, I guess we can't usurp Chicago.
All of that is the base of it. But let's talk about some of the bigger controversial incidents with the LAPD that are often talked about when people talk about the riots. 1979. We'll try to go in order, but in 1979, the police are called to 11926 South Orchard Avenue by the SoCal Gas Company after the resident, Eula May Love, who was a 39-year-old mother of two whose husband had died of leukemia 6 months prior, she'd failed to pay her $22 gas bill.
Now, so they called the LAPD for that?
Well, first, a service worker for the company goes, and they're going to shut off the gas, and she's like distraught, and she attacks him with a shovel. So they call the cops to come deal with it. Officer Edward Hopkins and Officer Lloyd O'Callahan. They approach her home. She comes out and is upset and has a knife in her hand. Whether she drew it to attack them or just had it in her hand, we don't know. Reports kind of differ from everybody, but according to
because they didn't have body cameras back then.
They couldn't turn off their body cameras back then. They approach her home. She has a knife in her hand, and she reportedly threw it at the officers. I also read that the cops managed to knock the knife out of her hand, but then she retrieved it.
They knocked it out of her hand, and they considered that throwing it at them.
I saw it flying. Anyways, the officers responded by shooting her 8 times on her front lawn.
God.
The community was obviously outraged by this, but all that ended up happening was the police received training using non-lethal force. So you're gonna go shoot a lady? Guess what? More training. What's that gonna?
I mean, that's always been
not the problem.
That's still their answer to everything.
Yeah. So no
We'll
investigation.
train
by
you
the
to
police
become
commission.
more lethal, without a weapon.
That's the.
I mean,
I
that's
hate
the
saying
si-
like that's the problem. It's like
I-
one of the 1,000 problems.
I know. This is case number whatever 1,000.
No investigation by the police commission was sought. Later that year, a new law was put into place that limited the release of police personnel records and allowed law enforcement officials to suppress information on investigations of police misconduct. Even with Mayor Bradley, Chief Gates, and Police Commissioner Stephen Reinhart in an 80-minute meeting, little was resolved other than we'll try to do better. So now we cut to 1982. PCP and Angel Dust.
I'm telling you, this is making me angry. Like every sentence we go through is making me angrier and angrier.
Yep.
And then it ends with a little bit of hope, and then you tell me what happened 30 years later.
1982 now. At this time, PCP and Angel Dust were pretty prominent drugs during this time. Now, the reputation of PCP, according to the LAPD, was that someone high on PCP was very aggressive, very violent, and they don't feel pain. So you can try to subdue them, but they won't
They
submit.
don't even celebrate Christmas.
They won't submit when they're on PCP because they aren't responding the way the officers are trained to deal with non-compliant suspects.
Is that true?
That, according to I only know it from the LAPD, so I don't know if it's true because the only time I've heard that is from
It's from a notoriously lying source. You know people who have done PCP.
What?
You know people who have done PCP.
I do. I don't know. Like I've never tried to take them down.
Give it a shot.
Everything smells like burning plastic. This gave the police an excuse to use any means necessary to take somebody down. Now, their number one tool to restrain and control someone at that time was using chokeholds.
When we see this stuff with the choke, like with, I want to say the first guy, but it wasn't the first guy.
Where Garner, George Floyd?
Garner.
Garner.
White boy here, I didn't even realize, like, that's something police, like, they regularly put people into chokeholds since forever.
Forever. Yeah. That's been their training for a long time.
Crazy. I mean, it's not a let you breathe hold. Like, it's a choke hold. It's meant to be hurting people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
why? I don't know.
There are two that cops are trained for in the 70s, at least. The bar arm and the carotid. Now, the bar arm is where you use your forearm across the neck, which is incredibly dangerous and led to a lot of deaths. Then there was the carotid, more of a V shape in the elbow, where the arm is placed around the front of the neck, cradling the midline of the neck in the crook of your arm, and then your free arm grips the wrist, and then you put them in a chokehold. This was the preferred chokehold used, but here's the thing about the carotid chokehold. It's incredibly dangerous, and it led to a lot of deaths. Both of them did. Cut to 1982. 20-year-old James Mincy Jr. got pulled over for having a cracked windshield. That encounter is fine. I probably gets a ticket, I don't know, but then he drives off, and then a second police vehicle, the LAPD Foothill Division, notices his cracked windshield, throws on their sirens, and try to pull him over.
This is the same day.
Same day, like minutes later, but they didn't realize that he had already been pulled over, and Mincy doesn't know that it's a different cop car, and he's confused. He has no idea what's going on, and he keeps going. And the second cop car thinks that this is a pursuit now. So Mincy drives to his mother's house in Lakeview Terrace. The cops following him, and he gets out of the car, and the police are trying to take him into custody, and he doesn't understand why, and a struggle ensues. He is resisting arrest, and the officer put him in a carotid chokehold, not killing him there, but putting him in a coma by cutting off oxygen to his brain, and he died 2 weeks later. This was the 15th death in over 7 years because of the chokehold.
And this happened in Lakeview Terrace also. So not even the last time that would happen, or something would happen in Lakeview Terrace.
That same year, later in the year, when I read an article about James Mincy Jr., they mentioned the 15 who died before that. Same year in August, Donald Wilson, 23-year-old African-American man from South Central, was killed using a modified carotid chokehold. In response to the overwhelming backlash over the death of Mincy, Daryl Gates, speaking on a hunch, if you don't have reason to not like Daryl Gates yet, let's get into it. Daryl Gates said, "We might be finding that in some blacks, when it is applied, the veins or arteries do not open up as fast as they do in normal people."
Wait a minute. So he's saying they're physically different now.
Yeah.
There's something different in their anatomy.
And he's also used the phrase "normal people."
Did you say that, or and I just
and you were just starting to speak over it. Want me to say it again?
Say it again.
Okay. "We may be finding that in some blacks, when it is applied, the veins or arteries do not open up as fast as they do in normal people."
There it is.
Yep, he sure did say that. He was trying to defend what he said versus what he meant, saying that he was talking about wanting to put the emphasis on normal arteries and instead put the emphasis on black people. But people were not having it, and rightfully so. This just added to a long list of racist, homophobic, misogynistic things that Daryl Gates is known for saying, which includes telling an audience, people listening to him in person, that Latino officers weren't promoted as often because they were lazy. Daryl Gates. Like, I would look up a name. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna look up more information about one. Like, throughout 13 pages of research I was doing, I'm gonna look up a thing. It would always circle back to something about Daryl Gates being a prick. God, I hate Daryl. Okay, some reform did occur here because both chokeholds by the LAPD were banned, which meant that now they were stuck with batons.
Wait a minute. So is that still in effect that for the LAPD that they don't do those
I think,
things?
Honestly, I don't know, because I feel like they're still putting people in chokeholds.
But
I
then
never
again,
looked
you
up if they
never-
were ever,
but-
reinstituted.
But you don't hear about that sort of death happening in Los Angeles.
I guess not. They just shoot people.
Yeah. They have batons to do that. Why bother choking people when you
Yeah.
can give them seizures for the rest of their life by hitting them over the eye with a baton?
We should talk about the gangs that formed in South Central as well. There's a group of white guys. Okay, we're going to go back to around 60s, 50s, 60s. There was a group of white guys going around attacking black and brown people in South LA. They were known as, disgustingly, as the spook hunters.
I've heard of them.
To combat this, different groups started forming to fight back. These were groups like the Slaussons, the Gladiators, the El Vikings, the Businessmen. Bunchy Carter of the Black Panthers himself was in a Slausson set called the Renegades. These groups started as a defense for guys in areas like Hawthorne and Inglewood that get jumped if they were alone. These groups would, through the tumultuous years of social and economic decline, would later be the basic framework for street gangs like the Crips that would form and get more aggressive through the 80s and 90s as a new element entered the scene. That element was a new form of cocaine known as crack. It was cheaper to make, thus cost way less than cocaine, so you can buy some of it for as little as $5 if you weren't concerned with profits. And once it hit the streets, that was that. The crack epidemic in Los Angeles was thanks to basically one guy, a couple guys, but Freeway Wick Ross, who had a connection with his Nicaraguan-born supplier, Oscar Dania Blandon. Blandon had a Colombian supplier who would sell Blandon cocaine, and that trafficked to Ross. According to urban legends that some people see this as absolute truth, crack was introduced to Los Angeles by the CIA to fund the Contra.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Ross would make the money selling crack, give his money to Blandon, who would give the money to the Contra rebel groups in Nicaragua, who were funded, trained, and armed by the CIA. So a lot of people think the CIA introduced crack into the thing. Crack is incredibly addictive and cheap, so it sweeps across
You
the
know
country.
people who do crack.
I do know people who...
You ever take them down?
You ever try to be a vigilante? And
You ever try to wrestle with them?
no thanks. Crack is not just a problem in LA, it's a problem across the whole country,
Yeah.
but in LA. Big
Big cities
problem.
had a big problem with it.
Exactly. So
New York, terrible.
Yeah. Crimes of all kinds skyrocketed because of crack, and thus began the war on drugs. To respond to this, LAPD doubled down on the militarism, and because of the Watts Rebellion, according to some book I read, other sniper incidences, which I don't know what they're talking about.
talking about these
I tried
sniper-
looking up like sniper Los Angeles, and I got all these weird results.
I tried finding like official reports of
Yeah.
a sniper. There's nothing. I just saw one picture labeled "There's a sniper," and like I said, it's one guy hiding behind a car, and everyone's just standing there watching.
The sniper's drawn into the photo.
Exactly. Look
He
at
would
that.
be right here if he was real.
The thing about that is like, so they know enough to recognize crime is happening because of crack.
Yeah.
So instead of, why don't we build programs to help people not be addicted to crack?
Yeah.
Why don't we just get more cops?
Yeah.
Why don't we get thicker
turn
batons?
the cops into a RoboCop?
Yeah.
That's the 80s in LA. 80s and early 90s of LA. It was like the cops thought that they were a conquering army. A special task force was created and developed through the 60s, and we have now come to know that team as Special Weapons and Tactics, SWAT. This was part of the LAPD Metro Division, approved by Daryl Gates early in his career as his chief.
Wait a minute. Was SWAT only an LA thing?
I think it was created in LA.
Really?
Yeah.
So it was meant to be originally an anti-crack?
No. It was developed early because of the Watts Rebellion and different sniper incidences. They started developing
I see.
SWAT. But in the 80s...
What is SWAT? I don't understand. Like, what is their purpose?
Special Weapons and Tactics. They're more, I guess,
What
a
is the
more
purpose other
aggressive
than-
version of the cops. Like, the cops can't handle something that has an extra tinge of danger, so they send in the SWAT, which is like a special, like the Marines of the cops.
So, yeah, it's like the Green Berets.
The Green Berets of the cops, yeah.
Bigger, angrier, more racist.
Super white.
Even whiter.
Even whiter than before. By 1985, the SWAT was now going to be utilized as soldiers on the war on drugs, and they saw the crack epidemic as an excuse to act like a conquering army, and anyone who resisted them in any capacity was clearly the enemy. There's footage of SWAT driving literal battering rams on wheels and tanks full on into homes.
Like
battering
through a-
rams into like a front door and just knocking the front wall of a house down. And they're like gonna catch that crack.
They're like the Keystone Cops, but really scary.
But I don't laugh.
Yeah,
at them.
but they're not funny at
They're
all.
not funny at all. They're like Keystone
Ridiculous.
Cops, but they have more money. There's footage of SWAT.
Well-funded Keystone Cops.
They have all these military things you'd only see in Vietnam.
Right.
Okay, so war on drugs, they were just like arresting everybody. Hundreds of people seemingly using excessive force with a large number of them, if not all of them. This has come to be known as Operation Hammer, and it was a show of force from the LAPD.
Everything about this is so aggressive.
Yeah.
War, hammer, Warhammer.
That was their whole thing. It's a show of force. We are so much stronger than you. And that was the point they were trying to prove. And when you're doing that, you don't feel the need to show respect or communication.
Yeah.
Or
Why respect someone when you can flex your muscles? at them?
Exactly. And that's herein lies the never-ending problem of the 80s in this era.
I mean, as we've talked about this more and more, like it seems so easy to fix this problem.
I mean, like seemingly, like to us, sure, yeah. To residents of South LA, this was just abuse. They were destroying homes, making people homeless in the process, and for so little to show for it, crime was still skyrocketing and crack cocaine was still proliferating. Like, so now we'll get into the ultimate sin with Operation Hammer, and it comes in 1988 when, based on a tip, they raid 2 apartment complexes at 39th and Dalton and destroy the place. Like, think over the word destroy. Destroy. Like they destroyed.
Tear the bricks down.
Basically. Not even practically to search for drugs. I've had my house raided before, not to brag. And it's insane. Like look at where we are. Imagine, think of everything in your apartment.
You know PCP.
Somebody was living on a property and they suspected him of selling drugs. So we had a police raid at our home. There was nothing as bad at 39th and Dalton. It was a police raid. So everything that you imagine is standing up, like a table and a couch, everything's just flipped upside down, and everything that's on something is just on the floor. Like everything is
and they just leave it?
Yeah. Well, they're going to clean it up.
Don't they have a cleaning crew?
I remember getting home and everyone was on my porch and no one was making eye contact and there was quiet. And I knew, like, what? They handed me a paper and I opened it and it was a search warrant. Like, I've never seen one of these before. And I opened it at my house. I have a 60mm camera and it was out.
Oh,
and
I remember this.
I keep that hidden in my closet, and it was on the kitchen table. I'm like, what? And it's like, one of the officers saw it, and he's like, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought it was great. He's wondering where you got it. Okay, cool.
He exposed all your film. Also, you know that Zabur.
He held it up. You took footage of Who Shot Kennedy? He held that right up to the light.
He thought there might be drugs on it.
Anyways, 39th and Dalton. Not comparing. I'm just saying, in contrast, I know what a police raid of a home looks like. 39th and Dalton, August 1988. Toilets were destroyed. TVs kicked in. Walls kicked in. Fridge pushed to the side, lying on the side of the fridge. Door frames hanging off the wall. Everything in that place was broken and thrown on the ground. All of this. And what did the police uncover? 3/4 of an ounce of rock cocaine, 6 ounces of pot. I'm reading this verbatim from the LA Times article by John Mitchell. The police smashed furniture, punched holes in the walls, destroyed family photos, ripped down cabinet doors, slashed sofas, shattered mirrors, hammered toilets to porcelain shards, doused clothing with bleach, and emptied refrigerators.
Wait a minute, why would they douse clothing?
Why not? You can get away with it.
Like invisible drugs? Maybe if we pee on this, the drugs will show up.
Some officers left.
There's a way to do it. Like if you have to do that, you can do it with respect. You don't have to rip their door frames off.
There's a cop in one of the documentaries like, this is impractical because like you're looking for drugs, so you throw everything on the ground. How are you supposed to find the drugs? You're a conquering army.
You got a lot of broken glass in here, but no drugs.
Some officers left their own graffiti. LAPD rules, rolling 30s die. Officer Todd Patrick said in one of the articles was one of the most eager participants. He used an axe to break through walls and cut down furniture. Dozens of residents from the apartments and surrounding neighborhood were rounded up. Many were humiliated. I can never say that word. Humiliated. They were humiliated and beaten, and
you don't know how to say the word. You just experience it a lot.
That's my life.
Anyway, I just wanted to make fun of you. Go on.
Well, it's easy to do. Nobody was charged with the crime, so they were just rounding people up, beating them, making fun of them, and then just been all right. Well,
I can't believe not only that they graffitied the walls, but actually said LAPD. I'm surprised they didn't say LAPD rules, whatever drools.
Yep.
I'm really surprised they didn't put that.
This LAPD arm flex was so bad that the Red Cross had to come and help these people. 10 adults and 12 minors were never repaid for the damages. They were left homeless after the LAPD went to do this drug search and got so little drugs that it wasn't even worth it. The next day, so the captain was not present for this. He was eventually fired. He talks in the documentary too. So basically when they went to execute the search warrant, there was no one in command.
Okay.
Their captain wasn't there, so it was just a bunch of cops, maybe like a leading officer, but nobody was there, like a captain being like, no, we don't need...
So Scar wasn't there, but the hyenas were sent in.
Got it. The captain was not present for the raid and went to look at the damage, and it said that the police blamed gang members for the damage, and then eventually they found out that it wasn't.
I know the name of the gang. 4 letters.
Also, let's not forget that during this...
According to some people, they rule.
You did research on this, so let's not forget this era. Crash unit at the Rampart.
Yeah.
With people like Rafael Perez. This is like 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
We wouldn't figure out how corrupt the Crash unit was until the late 90s, but like this is their era. This is their heyday.
Right.
Anyways, 39th Dalton, the public was furious. Rightfully so. They were demanding civilian oversight and some accountability, but little came of this. The police commission did little in reprimanding the officers, and they were even acquitted of the misdemeanor vandalism charge. Like, we didn't even get in trouble for that. Police committing crimes, violating people's civil rights, and who is to judge them but more police? The code of silence reigned supreme in the LAPD. There's an incident in Long Beach in 1989 where Don Jackson was beaten, thrown into a plate glass window, and arrested all on camera. This, I think, testing profiling among officers for a news broadcast. So all of this was on camera. Here's another small one.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Small, but
so hang on, I have to sneeze. But also, wait. So they were filming a news segment about police profiling, and in that segment, they profiled a guy and threw him through a plate glass window.
From what I understand,
that's great reporting. Then they got to the heart of the story.
1990, a 27-year-old member of the Nation of Islam and an Air Force veteran named Oliver Beasley was pulled over by Alley County Sheriff deputies over a traffic stop. That turned into a skirmish, and Beasley was shot and killed. So this is this. It's just this over and over and over. Now we get to 1991, March 3rd, a little bit after midnight, and a 25-year-old unemployed construction worker from Altadena and his two friends have been partying. They've been drinking and watching a basketball game, and they get on the road. The passengers are Freddie Helms and Brian Allen, and the driver is Rodney King. Now, King is behind the wheel of a white Hyundai on the 118 freeway going about, it's reported he was going 150 miles per hour, but later reports are like it's a Hyundai, it can only go 100 miles per hour. So 100 is like way past,
to see
but also like you're exaggerating.
Speedometer on that thing.
He was going really, really fast, enough to get pulled over, rightfully so. He's been drinking, he's driving fast. He was spotted by Tim.
So this is the incident, right? I didn't know there were two other people in the car.
Yeah, there are two other people in the car.
Okay.
He's spotted by Tim and Melanie Singer, a husband and wife highway patrol team, and they go after him. They turn sirens on.
Wait a minute. What?
Husband and wife highway patrol team.
That's allowed?
I guess.
Were they on like a motorcycle and then like a sidecar thing? Like, why would that be allowed?
Were they in a minivan?
Why would that be allowed?
Why wouldn't it be?
You're not supposed to be working with your significant other.
That is true. I don't know. I didn't look into that much.
That's weird.
This will be our next episode is Tim and Melanie Singer. And would you have to sit in the sidecar? They turn on their sirens and they want to go after him, and King gives chase. Getting off on Paxton exit and Sylmar, Pacoima, Lakeview Terrace. I've heard all three of them called that. And he starts racing through the streets, but it was like 65 miles per hour. But he's still not pulling over. Now, LAPD then joins in on the chase after this. King admittedly says that he was on parole for armed robbery and he was getting caught drinking and driving, would surely mean he's going back to jail. So yeah. He was going to try to get away. He's driving incredibly recklessly, and finally near the Hanson Dam.
I'll tell you exactly where it is.
Near the Discovery Center.
It's right, where the library and the Discovery Cube is. It's right around that curve, and I walked to it because I would work at that place at the library there all the time, and then I was doing something, and I found like that's where it happened, and I walked there. And it's weird to stand right there. It is, and it kind of looks the same, but no marker, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
and why would they have a marker?
Why would they have a marker? But like maybe there should be a marker. Not that the city would ever put a monument to police brutality.
The LAPD should pay for it, though. This is where we were caught messing up. I always thought it was off of Paxton. What is that, like the 5 or the 118? I always get confused by that general area because I can never tell what it is.
118.
Yeah, it's a 118 leading to the 210.
To the 210, yeah.
So
I think it is the 210 at that point.
Maybe it is, yeah. But yeah, it's a 210.
It's been so long since I've been at work, I don't really remember.
It doesn't matter what freeway it is.
Not the point of the story.
Yeah, exactly. How very Californian of us. Finally, he was brought to a halt near the Discovery Cube.
Future Discovery Cube, just a grass field at that point.
A pickup truck, I guess, was blocking the road, and he couldn't go anywhere. So the Singers finally get to the car. 2 of the 3 passengers, Brian Allen and Freddie Helms, they get out of the car, and they follow police instructions. The driver was said to hesitate. Rodney King hesitated and slowly climbed out. Brian Allen later said it was the seatbelt was giving him trouble, so he just couldn't get out of the seat as fast as they wanted him to. And he said by the Singers that he was smiling and waving at the helicopter overhead that was following the car chase. Singer ordered King to put his hands on his head where he could see them, and in Singer's testimony, Rodney King grabbed his right buttock with his right hand and shook it at me. I don't know if he grabbed Singer's butt or his own butt.
I'd like to get to the bottom of that as well, actually.
King finally complied with Singer's order to lie on the ground, and Melanie drew close to King with her gun drawn to make the arrest.
So this is still the husband and wife team?
Yeah, this is the husband and wife team. The LAPD just gets on the scene here. Well, the cops on the scene are, this is the 4. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn, who's 40 years old. Officer Lawrence Powell, I call him Babyface Powell because he has a baby face. Timothy Wynn, who's 30, and Theodora Brazino, who's 38. A little background on Babyface Powell and Brazino. Brazino was suspended for 66 days without pay in 1987 for using excessive force after he was found to have unnecessarily kicked and struck a handcuffed man. And Officer Powell is facing a police inquiry into charges by 2 black college students that they made racial slurs and physically abused them in the last month. So after these 4...
So this is the team.
This is the team on scene. And after these 4 show up, 11 more officers are on the scene. From basically this point, the movements are hard to track and stories diverge. Something that is confirmed is that Powell and Wynn's patrol unit transmitted the computer message that an earlier domestic dispute between an African-American couple was right out of Gorillas in the Mist, a reference to a motion picture about the study of gorillas in Africa.
Who said this?
Powell and Wind. These are two of the cops.
Okay.
And this is talking about
Great.
a previous thing that night. So already.
Yeah, we know where their mind frame is.
So there's that, yeah. So now cops will say that Rodney King was being belligerent, not cooperating, resisting arrest, kicking and swinging at police. Witnesses on the scene said he was complying with what they were saying. Brian Allen said that he and Freddie Helms were manhandled and taunted.
Again, the LAPD officers coming by.
There.
You're not talking about a different crime again that we've committed, are you?
So at some point, I can't tell what's really happening because I'm getting all these different stories. They like singers have him on the ground. LAPD have him up, standing up. He's complying. He's not complying.
Again, like you were saying, there's no body cameras for them to turn off during all of this.
What happens at some point, though, is that the cops try to use a swarm tactic, which is like one cop for each arm. They grab his forearm, another cop throws himself around the neck, and then they put him down on the ground. Try to use the swarm tactic on him, but he like evades it, and then he's said to have charged at the cops. Although eyewitnesses says that's not true, but we find out later that he did run in some direction. It could be that he was charging at them, or maybe he was trying to like get rid of, because they also at this point tased him, and then they started swatting him with their P24 batons. The last resort for cops now was using a chokehold, which was banned.
So then how is that a last resort if it's banned?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What I meant was they used the batons, which was the last resort because it was banned.
All right.
And at some point, when they start swatting him, they tase him twice, he hits the ground. And 3 of the cops start pummeling him with their batons while Sergeant Kuhn looks on. Rodney King was hit 56 times with a baton. Brian Allen said that his friend is on the ground because the cops made him be on the ground on the other side of the car. And he was terrified, having been made to, crawl on the ground. And he's just listening to Rodney King, his friend, get beat, screaming in agony, being hit with these batons. He said he could hear Rodney King screaming, "Stop, stop." And at some point, he stopped screaming, and all you could hear, this is a quote from Brian Allen, all you could hear was bones being broken, a crunching, a whip sound.
How many officers was this?
3 cops beating him, 1 cop looking on, and then that was from the 4 notorious ones, and then 11 cops plus eyewitnesses were around. His beating went on for, I think, over 9 minutes. Okay, so they beat him. The Rodney King beating is this. They drive him to the hospital.
This is the titular beating of the Rodney King beating.
Had a fractured cheekbone, 11 broken bones at the base of his skull, and a broken leg. My grandma was working at County Hospital when they brought him in, and they said that his own mother didn't recognize him. The cops never talked to eyewitnesses, and in fact, the officers left Brian Allen and Freddie Helms there standing by the side of the road, and Allen remembers one of the cops saying, "Guess what? You're in a Crips neighborhood." They were, I guess, were Bloods. And then they laughed and took off. The initial report of the beating came at 12:56 a.m. when Sergeant Kuhn's unit reported to the watch commander's desk at the Foothill Station, "You just had a big-time use of force, tased and beat the suspect of the CHP pursuit big time." They filed their police report saying it was necessary to subdue King with several baton strikes, 2 shots from a taser gun because he attacked officers and resisted arrest. Pretty standard arrest. Like, there's nothing really that stands out saying we had to use excessive force and none of that. Not a single person knowing that across the street from the scene all this time, George Holliday, a plumbing supply store owner, had videotaped all of it. He was awoken by the helicopters and lights from the siren and wanted to try out his new video camera, and he wanted to get footage of the sirens. And when
I want to hear the story of him getting the video camera that Christmas, and I can't wait to use this.
He caught 9 minutes and 20 seconds that was about to change the city of Los Angeles. The next day, Holliday began trying to sell his tape. First, he tried the LAPD. I don't know why, but even more mysterious was why they didn't want it.
I'm thinking probably like, who's going to watch that?
Yeah.
They didn't understand
they
home video.
Had no idea. Then he tried to sell it to CNN. No thanks. He finally found his buyer. KTLA Channel 5 bought the Rodney King tape for $500.
Interesting. It's a steal.
They aired an edited clip of the video, and within days of the footage of Rodney King's beating, it was playing across the globe. One of the first captured instances of blatant, ugly police brutality. In LA, Gates and the LAPD were on the S-word end of an S-word storm, which everyone, not just civil rights groups, everyone was demanding justice. They wanted those cops fired, charged for assault, and they wanted LAPD to go under heavy reform. All perfectly normal things to ask for. Even if the reforms didn't work, like, we caught you this time, and this is going to change. That was a feeling for a lot of people. We got you now. We finally, after all these years of you pushing us around, we finally got it, and now the world can see it.
We have, maybe people will believe us now.
Yeah, exactly. Gates went on the defensive. Even he said the video was awful, but, I'm sure what was awful was him getting caught, basically.
Yeah,
but
that's awful. Who are these guys? Who are those guys on the film?
He apologized for the beating and called it an aberration. Everyone, including old enemy Tom Bradley, wanted his resignation. Gates recommends felony prosecution for his 3 officers involving in the beating and promised to discipline as many as 11 officers that stood by and did nothing. The DA's office is seeking a grand jury investigation as hundreds of people protest outside of Parker Center. I think for 3 hours they were shouting at Gates to quit for him to be out. And he was just like sat there and had to take it, which is great. Rodney King was held for 3 days at county jail before being released. Prosecutors later announced that no charges would be filed against him. How very nice of the LAPD. Around this time, King goes on TV and shows his bruises, and he looks pretty not good. I guess so. I don't know. But he goes on TV. A few days later, it comes back that he was not high on PCP, which means his beating can excuse away that he was on PCP, so we had to use extra force. Everything regarding that tape beating is boiling. You know, police are under heavy scrutiny, and it's well deserved because no DUI should end with 50 baton strikes from 3 officers in a falsified report.
I didn't realize that both of these were DUI. Yours and mine were DUI situations.
Both DUI situations. Oh, also, Sergeant Kuhn said that if he could have used a chokehold, it would have been a much simpler takedown, even though it could have killed him.
He said even though it could
Sergeant
have killed
Kuhn said if I was able to use a chokehold, this would have been a lot easier.
Easier for who?
Yeah, exactly. This sentiment is agreed on by Mark Furman in one of the documentaries. Remember Mark Furman?
Who's Mark Furman?
He was one of the officers at the scene of OJ, Bloody Glove, and they'll later find out that he was incredibly racist and did not help that situation at all. Great team you got rooting for chokeholds.
This is ridiculous.
I know you had a freeway right next to your house. Officer Powell claims beating Rodney King with a baton and him not submitting made him realize that the LAPD policy was deficient as far as bringing a suspect down.
I mean, deficient in what?
If I could use a chokehold, he would have submitted. But with the batons, you see how long I had to beat him for? I'm paraphrasing, and I'm assuming that's what he meant.
What is the can't we all just get along thing?
It's coming.
Okay. I thought that was happening during the beating.
At a public forum, Daryl Gates joked, if it wasn't for our helicopters, the lighting would have been horrible.
See, that's tone deaf. We're not as bad as a corrupt police chief.
This happens on March 3rd, March 7th or 8th. Now we go to March 16th, 1991. 13 days after Rodney King was beaten down. We're going to go to 9100 South Figueroa Street, the same block as a Hacienda Hotel where Sam Cooke was killed. We're going to go to the corner to the Empire Liquor Market. A 15-year-old girl named Latasha Harlins goes to buy orange juice from a Korean-owned convenience store. She grabs the OJ and she puts it in her backpack, but not to steal it.
Don't use the word OJ, and you're confusing me now with
orange juice. She grabs the orange juice and she puts it in her backpack and goes to the counter to pay the $1.79 for it. Not trying to steal it, just trying to get it out of her hands. Mm-hmm. Puts it in her backpack. Right. But the woman working the register, the store owner, Soon Ja-do, doesn't see it that way, and she accuses Latasha of trying to steal it. Latasha is showing her the money. I walked through the counter. I'm trying to pay you. I'm not stealing this orange juice. But Soon Ja-do isn't having it, and an argument breaks out. And Ja-do, she reaches for Latasha's sweater, and this pisses her off. So she takes a swing at the lady and knocked her to the ground. And then the lady throws the stool she was sitting on. Latasha tosses the orange juice on the counter and turns to walk away to be the bigger person. Soon Ja-do then pulls a .38 caliber out and shoots Latasha in the back as she's walking away.
This was 2 weeks after?
13 days.
Okay.
Yeah. All of this caught on security camera, police concluding that there was no attempt at shoplifting. This incident broke open the long conflict between Korean shop owners in South Central and the African American community.
Yeah, I know that there was that was a big part of this story.
Yeah, I kind of always forget about it too. Like you always think it's like the cops versus the black community, and then there's this third thing in there too. This
the three-way war.
Yeah.
Oh, my neighbors are back.
Pretty cool.
Just in time for quarantine again. Phase 2.
Korean immigration soared through the mid-'80s and had grown 140%, which I don't ever know how over 100% of something works. But the jobs and opportunities they came to America for were not always there. And in many cases, they drift south of Koreatown to South LA, and they would have these shops. And there was no attempt to sort of bridge the gap between the communities that they were serving. So there's a lot of animosity.
So it was just...
Koreans would accuse African Americans of stealing and assaults.
So this was a common thing.
Yeah, this was a common thing. Okay. And this is a thing that had been happening for a long time. Right. African Americans would accuse Koreans of harassing them and discrimination. Like if you went into a Korean-owned store, you would get followed around the entire time, and they'd just watch everything that you're touching. Flip side of that is a lot of stores were getting robbed because of the big crime wave that was happening. Latasha Harding's murder seems to be the breaking point in the tensions. The situation was made so much worse in November of that year at the trial. Du said that she was acted in self-defense because she believed her life was in danger, although 2 witnesses that were there that were like Latasha's age and the security camera footage showed that she shot this 15-year-old girl in the back. Now, she was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a sentence that had a minimum of 15 years in jail, but the judge, Joyce Carlin, disagreed with the jury's sentencing recommendation and gave Soon Ja-do 5 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and $500 fine for shooting a teenage girl in the back.
Wait, a judge can disagree with a jury?
I guess
and
I
just
didn't
do whatever
even know
they
that.
want?
Yeah, and she was just like, well, that sentence is too harsh.
Why do we have juries?
Exactly. Exactly.
We're getting to the bottom of a lot of problems here.
Yeah, we are, based on all the documentaries that I watched.
You and me. No,
people trying to get to the bottom of
both of
this.
us.
The judge said about the jury, this is not a time for revenge, and no matter what the sentence this court imposes, Mrs. Dew will be punished every day for the rest of her life. The reaction to this, volatile. People stormed City Hall demanding justice, real, actual justice. This death is not in the hands of the LAPD, but it fits this pattern laid out that black lives don't matter in LA. Cops can kill you for resisting arrest, destroy your home, make you live on the streets, face no consequences, and you can get gunned down trying to buy orange juice, and the killer would get probation.
Right.
This is the pattern. Back to Rodney King now. Over the span of the year, the cops are being charged for excessive use of force and falsifying reports, 2 of them anyways, but it hits a snag when the defense claims that because of publicity, there'd be no way these cops could get a fair trial in Los Angeles.
Which is why
It's
they
hooey.
go to...
And it shouldn't have happened, but the judges on the trial switched from Judge Kamen to Judge Weisberg, and suddenly a change of venue is accepted, and of all places, it's moved from Los Angeles to Ventura County, Simi Valley. If you're not from LA or you don't know Simi Valley, it's on the other side of the San Fernando Valley. You got to pass the Santa Susana Hills where the Manson and his trash children lived into the Republican conservative Badlands.
Not just Republican and conservative, but mostly cop. So
cop and Marine.
the thing, like,
or military.
let's put Sauron on trial, but let's do the trial in Mordor with a council of orcs. Let's do that. That's where all the cops go to live.
Yeah,
not all of them, but
a large portion of them.
the only time I'll say not all cops is when I'm saying not all cops live in Simi Valley.
Some of them live in Orange County. Some of them live in Antelope Valley, Palmdale, Lancaster. Yeah, they don't want to live in the same area that they're serving, so they go to white suburbs.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
No, Copland is about this. Anyways, you should probably watch Copland. It's really good. Like I said, can't support corrupt cops, love a small town sheriff. Anyways, Simi Valley, 88% white, 1.5% black. This is where people who hate living in the city go. Now, the defense had more of a chance to find a jury to sympathize with these poor defensive cops, and jury selection began on February 1992, and by March, the prosecution found itself facing an all-white jury of cops supporting people in Simi Valley.
I don't know what 1.5% is of 12 angry men, so that's certainly not one
Like an
person,
arm,
so
yeah.
you can't. I guess they all have to be white.
So here we are. Everything since the Watts Uprising, all of it leads to April 29th, 1992. The 4 officers, Powell, Wynn, Brazino, and Sergeant Kuhn, would hear the verdict of guilty or not guilty for the charge of excessive use of force under the color of authority, and Sergeant Kuhn and Officer Powell with additional charges of filing a false police report saying the beating was minor. Powell on the stand said that the night he beat Rodney King that he was scared to death that King would grab his gun, and the strategy of each officer was distance themselves from the officers, claiming that they are all repulsed by what the other officers were doing and that they were in control. That's what Powell said, that he hit and kicked Rodney King under orders from Sergeant Kuhn, and then Babyface Powell.
Hang on, the LAPD's here again.
They're
You're not talking about Simi Valley now, are you?
we can handle you talking about police brutality and corruption in the Code of Silence, but don't talk about Simi Valley that way. So they're defending himself. They said we had to do this. He was attacking us, blah, blah, blah. The entire city hung in suspense of what the verdict the Simi Valley jury would come back with. Many people on the street, like if you watch any of the documentaries, everybody will say in the streets there was just like an electric feeling.
Yeah.
Like everyone
like people
knew.
Standing in front of the television store watching
Exactly.
the news
Yeah,
on the
like
TV.
exactly like that. And
Yeah.
like reporters, everybody knew that something was going to happen if it turned out a certain way. Residents, reporters, beat cops, all can attest to it. That subconscious feeling, danger hung in the air. And that gut feeling was right because all 4 officers were acquitted unanimously, not guilty on 10 of the 11 counts, and then the bottom came out from under the city. Officer Powell was the only one charged with excessive use of force, but because the jury could not agree on that charge, it was declared a mistrial. In the courtroom, when they not guilty, cheers, high fives among the defense and many people in the courtroom. In the streets and immediately
Someone
outside
wrote LAPD rules on the wall, and they all went home and
What are
had
they gonna
dinner
do?
together because they're all family.
Yeah. In the streets and immediately outside the Simi Valley Superior Court, heat. Smoldering heat, stirring anger. Like if you watch the footage, everything goes into a frenzy because people would pick up their camera. So you're no longer on a tripod. You're like, so like all the footage of immediately afterward, it's so frantic and everyone's shouting and you're like the cameras are just like going from face to
So
face.
it started immediately.
Oh, immediately.
Okay.
Outside the courtroom anyways, there was scream matches between conservatives in Simi Valley and everyone who came to support Rodney King. Not even support Rodney King, just to stand up for black people.
Right.
Outside the courtroom, multiple scenes of anger all at once when the officers, you could see the officers leaving smugly smiling. And people like, oh, you way to go, attaboy. And then other people screaming, you're guilty, you're guilty. Okay, so then we cut from Simi Valley to outside Parker Center in downtown. A large group of protesters are met with a line of riot police protecting the station. As in any crowd of protesters in the footage, there are 2 factions. And we've learned this now. There are 2 factions of a big movement. There are people who want to be heard, They want a peaceful discussion, but they want power in numbers. And there's another group that just want to trash everything because they're so mad. Yeah. Sometimes mad, sometimes opportunist. It's hard to
there's a subgroup in between that group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So eventually, the line of riot cops that are standing outside Parker Center protecting it, they retreat inside as the protesters gain mass and start throwing things at the station. Later in the evening, someone set a parking hut on fire. They broke into the LA Times building and trashed the first floor, setting cars on fire, this and that.
It's been a long time coming. What they've been publishing for decades at that point.
Was that on the tour we took? Did they mention
remember
that? Like, oh yeah, by the way, people broke in here and trashed the place.
I don't think they mentioned that.
Now, as intense as that scene is, it would not compare to what was beginning to grow on Florence and 71st. So that's where it initially starts. So before any of this, community leaders said that no matter what happens, we were going to meet at the First AME Church in West Adams. That's the one that Betty Mason helped build. Paul Williams designed it. It's a beautiful building. We're all going to meet here. We're going to talk. We're going to talk things out, reflect, hear from everybody. And they were going to send groups of young men out to walk the streets and keep everything in order. But the shock and the anger towards the verdict changed the civility of a lot of people in the community. Not everyone, of course, obviously, but like anybody who was out and had that energy, it was like a bad energy. Blind rage. Yeah. I can't describe it. Like, but watching the footage, I could see it. There's a large group assembling on 71st Street, trying to figure out what to do, what area to protest, what they need to do to be heard, where to take this feeling. And a large group of people decide, okay, well, we're going to go to a liquor store in Florence, and then just from there, we're going to go. And then there, things start to get out of control. Now, according to a 911 call from the guy working at the liquor store, a crowd came in and accosted him, stole the case of beer. Others were throwing bricks through the window and hit him with a bottle. Absolute mayhem from that point. 911 was obviously called and a squad car descends on the scene. They try to squash the commotion, but even at this point, it's already out of control. People start throwing bricks and bottles at the cop car, and now the cops are pursuing that person. They think that they have a suspect and they're trying to arrest him, but in doing so, swinging him around and manhandling him as he's resisting arrest in front of everyone. After all of the stuff that happened, the officers call for backup, and more people from the neighborhood are just coming out, and just as more cops are coming, twice as many people are coming out into the streets to meet them. It's very evident at this point the cops are greatly outnumbered, and the situation is that the highest pressure point next to just being shot at, this is like the moment before we start getting shot at. Everyone is screaming and shouting. Talk about the pressure. Everyone's screaming and shouting at you as you're just trying to put someone into a squad car, and the pressure is just so high. They arrest another guy, and he resists at first, but another officer calmly talks to him, and he cooperates. As this happens, more cops get to the scene, and they create a skirmish line, so more and more cops pour onto the scene. But as Lieutenant Michael Mullen tells it in one of the documentaries, they aren't equipped. These cops on the scene, they're not equipped to deal with this. All the riot gear is to the police academy. No helmets on the scene, no shields. So he pulled his officers out because he said retreat, because we can't do anything. Like, we're just beat cops. We can control it, but like, this is clearly out of hand. Cops were resistant to this. Michael Mullen said the cops were outnumbered and didn't want to use deadly force. I'm sure the thought was maybe we're the problem element, and if we remove ourselves, maybe cooler heads will prevail. Maybe that was a thought. I don't know. But the cooler heads saw the cops leaving. I thought the people in the crowd that wanted order were like, oh, so you're abandoning us. You created this heated situation, and then you cut and run, and that was it. So now the violent part of the mob saw this as an encouragement, like a victory. Like, yeah, we won over the cops. Now we get to Florence and Normandy at 5:30, which is the epicenter of the first day, the most violent day. People are in the streets and sidewalks throwing stuff at cars. Signs on the street were thrown at cars. Bricks, bottles are throwing things at cars, having no idea what was going on. Yeah. Just passing through. Stores in the area were being raided. Looks like dozens of people moving in and out of liquor stores. Cars were being destroyed, lit on fire. Fire purifiers all. Reporters and photographers were being attacked. If you drove by and you weren't black, people would pull you out of the car and beat you on the street. That was going on. That was caught on like video camera footage, and it's horrific to watch. Larry Tarvin and Choi Sai Choi, two men driving through the intersection, were pulled out and beaten. Around 5:30 to 5:40, a construction truck pulled up to the intersection of Florence and Normandy. This guy is pulled out of the driver's side door, and in front of a helicopter shooting it, beaten within an inch of his life by four guys who seemed to revel in the abuse. This is Reginald Denny that we would talk about for many episodes early on.
Kept coming up.
He was hit in the head with a hammer, a claw hammer, and then finally one of the guys threw a cinder block against his head. Every book and article I read said they throw a cinder block at him, and the guy that throws it does a, quote, touchdown style dance. It's a touchdown dance. I don't know why they keep it a touchdown style dance. Okay,
well, it's technically not a touchdown, so it's touchdown style.
I see what you mean now. Four guys who attacked Reginald Denny later are known as the LA Four: Henry Watson, Antoine Miller, Damian Williams, and Gary Williams. Another guy, Fidel Lopez, was pulled from his truck and beaten severely, and I think that they smashed a car radio against his head and it started spray painting on his body. I'm not sure what time this happens, but then the saviors come. People in the community, people who were angry but didn't want to watch the world burn, and they came out to help these people. Fidel Lopez was saved by Reverend Benny Newton, who stood over his body as he was getting attacked, saying, "Kill him and you have to kill me too." to save this guy's life. Another guy named Donald Jones went over, had some choice words with the guys attacking Choi Sai Choi, and was able to get him into his car and drive him off. Another young guy, 23-year-old guy, comes out, saves Larry Tarvin, who is beaten and dazed walking around the street as people shout at him. All guys from the community, all African-American guys who are like, this is not what we're after, and they're just saving people in the street. Bobby Green. He's in the documentary, and I absolutely love him dearly based on his appearance in it. Says that he was watching Reginald Denny getting beat on TV, and he hears a voice come down, and he says, go down there and save him. And he's like, all right. Voice is persistent, so him and his brother drive to Florence and Normandy, and he finds 3 other people trying to save Reginald Denny. Titus, Terry, and Lee. And together, they get Denny into the rig and drive him to the nearest hospital. They said that if they had waited just a couple of minutes longer, Reginald Denny would have been dead. His skull was fractured, among many other things. There were also hero cops who defied orders, went into the riot zone, and managed to save people without dying. Most notably, in the documentary, talked to Officer Lisa Phillips and Officer Daniel Nee, saved a woman trapped in a vehicle who was being assaulted with rocks and bottles. Officer John Pui was another person, went to the Nickerson Gardens housing project, which was on fire, and protected fire trucks who were being shot at and made sure that fire was able to be put out. It also helped other police units from getting attacked. One person who wasn't saved was a white evangelist named Wallace Tope Jr., who saw the riots going on TV and decided that he wanted to go over and try to talk sense into people. He was trying to stop people from looting a liquor store, and then he was beaten and kicked and left in a coma for 19 months before he died. The riots were full-on, out of control, mass lootings all around the area. The first structure fire was at 7:30 at 60th and Normandy. Fire and purifies all, and I mean like all, like a lot, like 266. And the police, nowhere to be found. So all this footage you're watching about the first day, no police anywhere.
So they were still, let's just
wait
back
this
away
out.
From this one.
They didn't get back to Florence and Normandy until 8:30 that night, and it was already war-torn. Where was Daryl Gates? You want to take a guess?
Greece.
The
Santa
man
Barbara.
who earlier smugly said, oh, we have a contingency plan for social unrest. He was in Brentwood, attending a fundraiser aimed at defeating an upcoming police reform ballot measure. Good guy.
The police chief always has a way of perfectly being a metaphor during these situations.
Right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. He didn't return to the command post until 6 in the morning the next day. During the riots, police found that they were wholly unprepared for this and set up a nearby command post on 54th and Van Ness. That in itself was an ordeal. That wasn't even a good command post. The rioting continued to spread all over the city. Crenshaw, there was looting, people throwing rocks, bottles, groups harassing drivers, gunshots heard in the air. At Parker Center, like I was talking about, it got crazier, turned over cars, they set police vehicles on fire, blocked traffic on the 101, they shot at fire trucks. Koreatown saw looting and fires at Westwood, had looting as at Hollywood. Did I ever tell you, I think I mentioned on this podcast before, my dad's story? Yes. He was working at the Firestone on Hollywood and Highland, and he had ridden his bike there, and it was the first night of it must have been the first day of the riots, and they're like, you gotta close the Firestone. There's just, like he was saying,
Not
like,
the Firestone.
I mean, everybody who was around that day, who was alive and watching the skies that day, it was black. Smoke everywhere because the city was on fire. So my dad's he said in Hollywood there was just cars full of guys driving like both sides of the street, like zigzagging, and it's just crazy in the streets. So he's like, okay, I guess he got a ride from somebody who was very reluctant to give him a ride, but he got a ride.
Drive me into this battle zone.
Yeah. Oh, I live on Florence and Normandy. He drove my dad to Echo Park, but he didn't get off the freeway. Like, drove my dad to the shoulder, let my dad off near the exit, and was like, you're on your own. So my dad didn't want to get arrested or didn't want to get in trouble, so he's just like zigzagging through small streets. Wants to get home, wants to make sure everyone's okay, just wants to get home. And he sees one of his friends come, and my dad just wants to stay out of trouble, and he sees one of his friends driving by. He flags him down. He's like, can you give me a ride to the house? This guy, I'm not gonna say his name. And he gets in the car, and he's driving side streets to get to the house, and my dad turns in the back seat. Washing machine, TV. His friend had been looting.
I could guess who it is.
I think you might be able to. That's the same guy that wanted to steal the 40 XL pants. I told that story.
I know who it is. I don't know if you've told that story.
In Echo Park, I think it's the Buy and Save, at some point had a novelty pair of pants hanging from the ceiling, 40 XL. And when the riots and looting broke out, this guy said, I got to go steal those pants. I need those 40 XL pants. And he went and they're already taken, which means that another person was like, gotta get those pants. And I'm curious to this day who has the 40 XL pants in Echo Park.
That's another thing I'm going to get to the bottom of after this. That's ridiculous. The second there's any sort of distraction, I'm going to go and finally steal that novelty pencil that's been hanging on the Staples.
I remember watching Reginald Denny getting beat on TV. I remember watching all of it. I remember we had to get my cousin eviction from her house and her family because they were living, I think, in Crenshaw. But I'll read everything she wrote a little bit later. A protest rally began late in the evening at Lakeview Terrace, where Rodney King was pulled over. It was not violent at first, but then it devolved into throwing rocks, shooting guns in the air, setting fires. There was a particular emphasis on looting, destroying, and setting ablaze Korean-owned businesses after Latasha Harlan's murder. In total, I think 2,000 Korean-owned businesses were destroyed.
Wow, crazy.
And it's horrific.
I mean, that's kind of like you've got a two-headed beast you're fighting right now.
Yeah, just watching the footage of people whose stores were being looted in the community, just in South LA, like people, like they're crying their eyes out, like, what are you doing? Like, I'm here with you right now. Why are you doing this?
Good thing it never happened again.
By 10 p.m., the city of LA was on fire. Governor Pete Wilson finally convinced Mayor Bradley and Chief Gates. Gates didn't want any help, and not even from Sheriff's Department at first. One of the Army Corps comes later in one of the documentaries, says that when he first met Daryl Gates sat in front of him and said, I don't want you here and I don't need your help.
Learn from the best.
Yeah. He didn't want to accept help he didn't think the National Guard was needed, didn't want the Sheriff's Department to help. He thought he was doing fine. He was mad at his own officers were retreating, which, fair point, but also like I feel like you don't get a say in this anymore. President Bush, the first one, broadcast a message saying anarchy would not be tolerated. For a couple days, it will be. The next day, really, it's more of the same. No people being pulled out of cars on the second day, but more looting with little to no police involvement. Any and every big store was raided. Fires continued to be set. Bradley put a dawn to dusk curfew out in the city. You could not be out in the streets during the riots.
You mean dusk till dawn?
Dusk till dawn, sorry. Dusk till dawn.
It's a Tarantino curfew?
Tarantino curfew, yeah. Rioting spread to Long Beach, Mid-City, Mid-Wilshire, Inglewood, Hawthorne, all these other areas. Bullocks, Wilshire was raided. On the second day is when the Korean community decided to start protecting themselves and their stores. As in told in one of the documentaries, I didn't know this, but Korean men had all been trained in the military back in Korea when they were a certain age. So they all had knowledge about using guns and combat.
Korea and Israel.
That's fair. They armed themselves. They went out into the streets and onto rooftops, and they fought off attackers. A news footage, a gunfight breaks out between Korean people and someone off screen, and it's crazy. It's just in the streets in Koreatown.
So, who, in terms of who the looters were, who were they?
Talking about their arrest later, a lot of Latino people were caught looting. So, disenfranchised, just people who had been poor, who couldn't afford anything, who worked really hard and still were really. I mean,
that's the thing with in Watts, some of the things I really need paper towels.
Exactly.
So people
I really need diapers.
I do need a diaper right
there
now.
Are no rules right now. I work really hard and I'm tired and I just want to, and I'm mad just like everyone else is mad. But also there's a lot of opportunists who just why not? What's going to happen to me? Really, what's going to happen to me?
Well, we'll talk after this about what I think kind of happened now in regards.
But now is very, very different.
It's
because it's finally,
different.
after all these years, pointed out these are people that are different than what this main thing is. And also stores now are it's okay. We understand that what's happening is bigger than a Target getting robbed. So Target came out, the one that was on fire, we're fine, but we believe in this movement and we think that police brutality is wrong. And people are all the conservatives are what do we do now?
We lost Target.
But looting.
But if Target says so.
The altercations with Korean people protecting their stores, there were casualties. People tend to bring up Edward Sung Lee, who was 18, protecting a pizza shop and was accidentally killed by Korean shopkeepers. There's a famous photo of him dead on the pavement with 3 other guys who were shot all around him at a pizza place on 3rd and Hobart. And I'm I know that pizza place. And I never knew that that's where that happened. I know 3rd and Hobart, Koreatown. It's one of the hundreds of images of the riots that are just it's devastating. I was saying before, trying to find a photo that you can positively spin about the 92 riots. It didn't make anyone look good because it was just blind rage. Everything was just no rules for 5 days.
I was 4. I don't remember any of this. I was in my own blind rage at 4.
I didn't talk about I think the second or third day. I remember being on the couch in the living room, which is facing the street. We were watching The Super with Joe Pesci, and then there was just shots, and I was pulled by my neck to the ground for a drive-by. And then for years afterwards, we had 2 bullet holes in our front steps, and I would show everybody that came over.
That was from that day?
From that day, yeah. And I'd show everybody. My mom stop talking about it. Look at the bullet holes.
Let's put your marbles in them so no one notices. That's scary.
The whole day is full of tragic images, not just 1992, but everything that led up to it. Just decades of people crying out for help, and it fell on in different ears, and now here we are.
Yeah, we've talked about this. These aren't just things that just happened.
The third day, May 1st, they got Rodney King on the news. They said it's an impromptu sort of we just stopped him sort of news conference thing, and he's out, and he's visibly shaken. Dozens of cameras shoved in his face. People for the last couple of days have been shouting his name as they beat people up, throw rocks at cars, shoot guns, set fire to build. His name is spray painted all over the city next to burned down buildings. Rodney King says people, I just want to say, can we all get along? And it's like, it's so sad because I remember that growing up being mocked so often.
Yeah.
And then
that's
watching.
all I hear it is as a joke.
But like watching the footage of all the riot stuff and getting to that, I'm like, oh my God, like it's so.
Does he
pained.
say, so his exact words are, can we all just get along? So
Can we
he
all get along?
So he doesn't even say, can't we all?
Yeah. he
So it's
doesn't-
it's like a Darth Vader.
Exactly. Yeah. It's another misquoted thing.
Yeah.
But
Can
can we
we-
all get along?
Can we all get along?
Can we all get along?
All right.
It's
Well, I mean, that's the same with the guy from Watts.
Yeah.
Like,
don't use me as the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't justify this using me as an example.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for this.
How pained he must be. Like his beating inadvertently caused this. I could see how much like turmoil he must feel. It's really painful. Looting, fires, gunshots, wilding, all kept going for more or less for like 5 days altogether. It was a whole thing until the National Guard was actually hit the streets. 10,000 troops swarmed the area. They were 300 miles away when they were initially called. LAPD also had help from the Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and the Army. Order was restored on May 4th. LAPD and other law enforcement agencies started to gain control, and law and order started to be restored. The curfew was lifted, and people were able to go out in the streets again.
How long was the curfew for?
4 days, I think.
It's about how much it was
4 or
in
5
Watts
days?
also, I think.
Yeah.
And this most recent one.
Yeah, but it sounds like the city was waking up from a bender, looking around, being like, "What happened? Like, what did we do? Who did this?" In the end, there was 2,300 injuries, 623 fires, 12,000 people arrested, an estimated $1 billion in damages, and 55 people dead. Of the arrests, like I was saying, only 36 people were African American, 51% were Latinos. Another group that had suffered from LAPD abuse and suffered from poverty and injustices. The Korean community also took a big hit. Like a lot of shop owners were left destitute after that, and they too had been mistreated and suffered with poverty and were discriminated against. And what happened, it wasn't a natural disaster, it was a social disaster. There isn't just one cause for this. Some people blame the rioters, some people blame the cops, but I feel like it's bigger than all that. Like it's history and indifference. It's pushing injustices into one group and seeing how far you could push them, not just the African American community, but like just people of color. Like how far can we push these people who are down before like this happens? Poor people, immigrants, like this was seemingly the culmination of years of anguish manifested into physical destruction. Many businesses never even tried to rebuild themselves. That was it. Like on Vermont and Manchester, there's an area the size of 4 football fields remained empty for like 28 years. The 92 riots were like, for a long time, were the worst American civil disturbance, with so much footage from different parts of town, from different scenes, from professional and amateur. It is one of the first times a riot on American street was captured like this.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like what we have today where people are filming the cops, people are filming what's going on. This was the first time that happened.
This was this, yeah. So what came of this? First, the Crips and the Bloods signed a pact, the Watts Truce, in which they called off all payback fighting. This actually happened the day before the riots took off, April 28th, over the shooting death of Henry Pecco by the LAPD as he was leading children out of a playground to safety during what police thought was an ambush. Over this, different housing projects who were at war with each other called a truce. This strength held through the riots and then on for years oncoming. This pact was modeled after a 1949 UN Middle East peace treaty.
This is crazy.
That a former gang member had found at the USC archives. This document, the peace treaty, coincidentally was drafted by Ralph Bunche, an African-American undersecretary that grew up in Watts and later got the Nobel Peace Prize.
So the Crips and the Bloods can figure out a pact amongst each other to make things better, and the LAPD and the rest of the city can't?
They can't.
So the Crips and the Bloods sat down like at Appomattox Courthouse and signed a document saying, let's end
squash this. But that was one of the bigger things that people talk about as a result of everything was like,
look what can be
the
done.
impact that this had, that these two groups hate each other. Were
crazy.
Like called the truce. The LAPD obviously took a big hit, and not just from optics and years of bad press. In this situation, they showed after years of abuse and doing anything to keep law and order, they were completely unprepared for civil unrest. Even after the Watts riots that both these men, Bradley and Gates, had lived through, they had seen that in their lifetime. Still, when they was presented with them, they had no idea how to act. Well, Bradley a little bit better, but he couldn't make the same calls that Gates could.
Yeah.
Bradley is better in this situation. Through the whole thing, he calls out Gates a lot, calls out the LAPD, says this isn't right, you should retire, you should step down. Warren Christopher had drafted the Christopher Commission. An LA Times article broke it down for me. The commission sought to investigate police brutality and found that there is a significant number of police officers who repeatedly abuse power, use excessive force, and ignore the written policies of the department regarding force. This misconduct, this group of officers tarnishes the reputations of a vast majority of LAPD officers who do their increasingly difficult job of policing the city with courage, skill, and judgment. This is still a problem. And this is like one big problem for me. Was like bad cops do whatever they want. They make good cops look bad. And good cops don't want to break the code of silence or they'll face internal retribution. Almost like cops being scared of cops and the broken system of policing continues.
Right.
People say there are no good cops. I believe that only in that no cop will step up to another cop.
I thought someone was towing cows. Yeah, I mean, that's what they're saying. The quote-unquote good cops are still complicit.
And so there are no good cops. If a good cop
Exactly.
is, yeah. The report showed that cops who got complaints of excessive force would continue on without being punished, even with multiple complaints. From the commission, they drafted the Charter Amendment 4, which limited the police chief's tenure from 5 years to 2 years, stripped civil service protections from the chief's position, and allowed the police commission to remove a chief for reasons other than misconduct. It also targeted protections Parker had won for rank and file cops, added a civilian to the department's internal disciplinary panels, and weakened procedural protections. In June of that year, voters voted yes on Charter F. Darrell Gates retired 3 weeks later. Mayor Tom Bradley left later that year. 2 years later, Congress passed 14141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which let the Justice Department investigate excessive misconduct and deadly force in the local police departments. It was drafted after a response to the Christopher Commissions after they looked into the LAPD. Sergeant Kuhn and Officer Powell were found guilty of violating King's civil rights later. They both served 30 months in prison and did not return to the police force. Brazino and Wynn were both fired from the LAPD. So those are those four.
Okay.
Now the other four, the LA
So wait,
four.
but why did they get retried?
And I didn't look into that much. Like
Well,
civil?
I guess you can bring cases to a bigger court.
I guess so. And now we're going to talk about the other four, the LA four that beat up Reginald Denny. Henry Watson, Antoine Miller, Damian Williams, Gary Williams were quickly identified and arrested in front of TV cameras and served several years in prison.
The common theme here is that TV cameras are always around,
Yeah,
like in
exactly.
every part of this, or a
But like
camcorder
everybody
from a
made such a
plumber.
big deal of like, look, we got the guys who got Reginald Denny. Look at us, we got them. And like, yeah, that's not the problem anymore. Like, yeah, that's we're glad that you arrested these guys because they committed a crime. But don't pretend like everyone's
Yeah.
on your side
We fixed
again.
it.
Yeah, exactly. We fixed it, guys. Years later, Reginald Denny went on the show Donahue with Henry Watson, one of the guys who beat him up. And Watson apologized for attacking Denny. Denny seems like incredibly understanding. He accepted the apology. Donahue asked Henry Watson, "Are you sorry?" And Watson replied, "Yes, I'm sorry for the injuries Mr. Denny suffered." And then Donahue asked, "Are you sorry for your participation in the event?" And Watson replies, "I have mixed feelings about it." Reginald Denny said, "This is a civil war. This is not me against Mr. Watson. It's not a personal vendetta. The problems were happening before Mr. Watson and I were born." And then the two shook hands.
Yeah, I think they both understand the
Yeah.
situation.
Rodney King died not too long ago, like a couple years ago. He drowned in a pool like his dad did 28 years to the day, had drowned in a bathtub.
What?
Yeah. Rodney King had drugs and alcohol in his system. And
That's
for
weird.
It's very upsetting. And for years, fought addiction, tried to get sober, and then he would relapse. His life after his beatings and the riots, for a long time, people, me included, used to refer to this as the Rodney King riots. Not easy, not right thing to do. Rodney King continued using drugs and getting arrested, and people call him a complicated figure, but to me, he wasn't. He's never set his life on a path to be a martyr or a symbol, just like Fry. He's just a guy.
Just
I'm
like any person.
yeah, I'm a troubled guy. I'm not a hero. I'm not like
Yeah.
the face of the movement. I'm just a guy that this thing happened to. Rodney King struggled with that for years. A lot of people will want to look at his behavior and say, see, like, look, he's not that innocent, but like,
Yeah, they tried doing that with George Floyd.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, like he had drugs.
yeah,
It's not the point.
The cop is an executioner.
Or judge or jury. He's a cop.
He's an officer of the law.
Yeah.
Rodney King might have been a drug guy, but looking at him through these interviews, he's so soft-spoken. He seems like somebody who takes a moment to think before he speaks, and he sounds really earnest when he speaks. And being an alcoholic and a drug addict isn't pretty, but it shouldn't land you in the hospital with broken bones after 4 cops rain baton blows down on you. That's not the way DUIs are handled.
No.
During our
I mean, it is how they're handled. It's not how they're supposed to be handled.
Apparently, yeah. During our most current protests and demonstrations over the death of George Floyd, and then similar ones over the last decade, the thing with George Floyd was only one of 3 or 4 recent ones within like a 2-week span. We had people in the streets in LA for these protests, but they weren't in South LA. This time we saw mass demonstrations in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Fairfax District. Looting and fires occurred, but overall the demonstrations in LA were peaceful. In Minneapolis, they burned a police station down pretty much to the ground, but organizers like Melinda Abdullah, one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter, said the protests needed to be in elite areas for anyone to take notice and send a message. South LA was spared this time, and don't think that that's not something I thought about when you saw these demonstrations. Was like, oh, they are so far away from the areas that had already taken these hits and were destroyed. They were spared. This move is incredibly thoughtful. These protests were organized outside of that area.
It does feel this time more that like people understand what needs to happen and what the problem is, more so than 1965 when they're like, yeah, Parker's right because he said it on TV.
Yeah.
People get what's happening. And yeah, the point of all this was get into the neighborhoods, bring this in the faces of the people who don't have to live like this.
Yeah. I mean, like, I felt so, because I wasn't going out and doing anything, but I felt like this needs to go to Simi Valley and Lancaster, like places where cops live. Take it to their houses and march there. But like, I don't organize or do anything. So who am I? The first couple days I was ready to go, and I was reading like things people are sharing on Instagram about what you need to take to prepare yourself for protesting. It was like, make sure you bring heat-resistant gloves to pick up tear gas canisters. I'm like, what? Huh?
That was the other thing with like the looters this time around. Not only did people easily spot out like that's not everyone, but it almost felt like a lot of the people who were doing it had seen 1992 and been like, I can't wait to do that. Like,
that's what I thought too. Is they're almost fetishizing the anarchy.
Exactly. And on the other side of that, I think a lot of the cops were like, I can't wait to do that.
Exactly.
So I think there were these two groups within these groups that were, there was the cops, and then there were these small group of looters who were just like, this is the video game I've always wanted to play.
But this is the zombie apocalypse that I've always envisioned. These movements, because they sustained for over a month, this isn't just an outbreak of concentrated rage. It's rage, but also like there's a lot of thought, and as people have good ideas about what needs to change.
I feel like it's finally breaking through.
I'm really hoping. But yeah, a lot of like the cops that killed George Floyd have been arrested. Like not just fired, arrested. They're going to actually face charges because they committed a crime when they killed someone who was unarmed and handcuffed.
It's encouraging, but at the same time, even since that, more stuff has happened.
Yeah.
But marching is good. It's bringing attention to all this, and it's getting through to a lot of people. But at a certain point, like, what's the next step that needs to be taken?
Yeah.
Like, marching at a certain point, like, it's good, but we need to do more than that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is. What is the next thing that needs to be? Because I was reading a thing about Martin Luther King's whole thing. Like, he wasn't just marching. He was like, let's march to this place so that we can get all these people to register to vote. Let's take direct action, civil disobedience. Let's break the right laws. But like, what are the laws? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what action needs to be taken next. What do we, the people, other than voting?
I think there's probably answers, and we're completely ignorant to it.
Yeah, I don't know what they are. I mean,
funding the police seems to be a big push right now. It's interesting. I need to learn more about it before I start shouting it at people.
I think they could certainly take a massive pay cut at the very least. I think $3 billion is crazy, but I don't know what the answers are.
How do you get rid of the code of silence? How do you make it so when a cop kills an unarmed person, all the other cops are like, you're making me look bad, and you need to be put behind bars because me carrying this badge, it's not the same thing as you carrying that badge.
Yeah, I think
that needs to happen, and I don't think it ever will, because like,
I think that's what they mean when they say tear it all down and rebuild it in a better way, which, if that's what it takes, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it, because that's one of the most dangerous things that the cops implement, is that they commit a crime and all the other ones cover it up, or they don't say anything.
No episode has made me angrier.
We've done other ones that I'm like, I'm going to read what my cousin wrote. But my cousin that we took in their family during the riots, this is what Vanessa wrote. Pre-riots, I remember loving the street we lived on. We were the only Hispanic family in our block. We used to play with our next door neighbor who had a pink Barbie Jeep in the front of our houses. Our neighbors to the right were an older black couple with fancy cars and a beautifully kept front yard. My dad worked the night shift, so it was just me. Oh, he worked at LA Times, I think. So it was just me, mom, and baby sister nightly, and I felt safe. I knew about the Rodney King beating because I loved watching the news as a kid. That's true. I remember hearing that the police officers were in trouble, but I didn't understand what it meant to have them on trial. What I did know was the day that the verdicts were read, my mom came to pick me and Susie up in Echo Park after she got off work that evening. At that time, she worked at the LA Times, so she must have heard the news about the verdicts, and she was acting nervous when she arrived. My mom was talking to my grandpa, in front of the brick wall of 2049. So she told him she was scared to go home in South Central because my dad was at work already. He told her to relax and that nothing bad was going to happen. So she reluctantly loaded us into the little blue Toyota and started home. I sat in the front in my booster seat, and Susie was in the back. Oh, damn. She must have been like 7 then. Usually she had dance music blasting on our rides home, but that evening we all listened to the AM news station. The ride home was tense, but I still didn't understand why. I didn't know about the verdicts. We got off our usual exit, Florence, off the 1 Tame and headed toward Western. But even before we could make it to the major cross street, our car was surrounded by a bunch of angry people at the intersection of Florence and Normandy.
God.
I didn't see the crowd.
Driving right into Florence and Normandy.
I didn't see the crowd initially as we approached Normandy. What I remember is my mom quickly reaching across my seat to lock the button on the door. Then our car came to an abrupt stop. I looked to the right outside the passenger window and I saw running in all directions. Then I saw a man with a box or something big in his hands running toward our car, and then he was gone. Other guys were at the front of our car pushing on the hood, shouting at us. At this point, I heard my mom screaming and motioning for people to get out of the way. My sister was crying in the backseat and everything was so loud. I remember her screaming, "Mommy!" It happened so fast. My mom managed to get through the intersection and hauled ass home. When we pulled into our driveway on 80th Street, my mom rushes us inside the house. There was a knock on the door and I was scared again. It was Mr. Ira who talked to mom in a calm and stern voice. He told her that we needed to leave, but it wasn't safe for us at home in the neighborhood anymore. After he left, mom ran to the bedroom and quickly got on the phone with dad's work. She managed to talk to him for a few minutes to let him know we were were leaving and wasn't sure where she was taking us. After she hung up, she told me to grab my toys and a blanket. I didn't know that would be the last time I would be home on 80th Street. Makes me sad now to think about, since Jackson is the same age I was that night, and her son is now that same age. To tell a kid to grab their favorite toy and whatever little possessions they can before running out the front door, it's crazy to me. We left quickly, and I don't remember where we went initially. It's a blur after that. My next memory is sitting in your living room. I shouldn't say my address out loud.
My next memory is reading your social security number.
My next memory is sitting in your living room, my living room, watching the news at night. I was scared. I remember your dad and my dad talking on the porch about guys possibly coming into the neighborhood to riot, which they did. It was just a drive-by. Everybody was on edge for what seemed like forever. I was on the porch with Grandpa one of those nights. He was sitting on a chair and had one of those handkerchiefs on his lap. I remember that, with his hand underneath it. I don't know what it was that set him off, but all of a sudden he shouted to me, go inside. My mom gathered us kids into the back bedroom, and I remember hearing Grandpa shouting at the front of the house. I think it ended up being some unfamiliar guys casing the neighborhood that had everyone scared. It's probably the gunshots. The days went on and on for a while. I remember your mom taking us for a ride in El Camino to check out the aftermath in Echo Park, National Guardsmen on the roof of Pioneer Market, and in the parking lot. I don't remember that. I had never seen armed people in public. I know I matured over the course of that short period. We did move back. I never went back to South Central. My parents lost their home and we were broke for a while. We moved into a small apartment in Atwater after that. I remember that. Life changed overnight, but nothing has changed in 28 years at the same time. I had what I think is PTSD watching the first round of riots on the news the days following George Floyd's murder. I was scared because I knew what it could all lead to, but I was angry that nothing has changed enough for a murder like that to happen in daylight in front of an audience at the hands of the police. I just keep thinking that Jackson, her son, is the same I was in 1992. That's the perspective I needed to make sure I didn't keep quiet about, and I'm bolder to speak my mind about injustices. I'm not angry about protests or rioters or burned buildings. I don't care about that. People are angry, and rightfully so. We were never angry about losing our home back then. We knew these injustices were and are still very real.
Well said.
Well said. My very intelligent cousin, who's always been incredibly intelligent.
Didn't you want me to marry her?
No. Susie, her sister. I'm like, when you were both single, I was like, both you two should meet.
I want Vanessa.
She's married to the most handsome military man I've ever seen.
Uh-oh.
With one of the best mustaches I've ever seen.
Well, she hadn't seen mine. You read that testimony. I'm hoping if we get him in time by the end of this episode, you'll be hearing, we asked for a bunch of people who have been protesting in the current protest to tell us their experiences and their stories. So I'm hoping at the end of the episode, you'll be hearing that. If not, boy, are we going to look embarrassed. Otherwise,
yes.
You can not embarrass us by leaving us a review on iTunes. That would be not embarrassing.
I wouldn't be embarrassed if a loved one asked me, do you have reviews on iTunes? I'm like, only 56.
We've got about double that, which is still embarrassing. But you can leave us a review on Apple Podcast, iTunes, wherever you listen to us. Leave us 5 stars, some words. It's nice.
Yeah.
It helps people find us, make us more visible. You can also follow us on Twitter at LA Meekly, our personal Twitters at DM Zaffron. And boy, is it hilarious.
It sure was for that week that you were posting.
Boy, was it funny for a week, and then all of the protests started, and then I was not feeling like making a joke for about over a month.
Just do what I'm doing, reposting really angry things. Yeah. What's mine? I gotta look mine up real quick.
Dumbboy at Dumbo.
You're being really mean. Grego_Gonzo
it's
on
at
Twitter.
Stupid Boy. It's at Stupid Boy, and it's not even on Twitter. It's on weeklink.com.
Grego Gonzo on Instagram, Grego_Gonzo on Twitter.
Yeah, you can follow our Instagram at LA_Meekly. If you want to listen to individual segments of our episodes, or if you want to listen to these, they're all on our YouTube channel as well. Yep. Oh, and also if you want to support us financially on Patreon, we make no money doing this, and I'm going to be laid off in about a year at most, and I'm going back to work in a few days, so I might be dead in 3 weeks.
Yeah, in which case I get all the money.
If you could figure out how to log into the Patreon, you could cash it all out. But yeah, you can support us for $1 a month. We'll say your name. You'll just be supporting us. For $5 a month, you will get handwritten postcards. We are now printing our own also. We're going to have some original designs coming. It's going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah, if one guy is listening to this, please do that.
Please make it pretty sweet. Don't embarrass us like all the other ways we're about to be embarrassed. This has been a rough month.
I don't like using the phrase rough because it means that it's bad. It hasn't been bad.
The protests haven't been bad. The other horrible thing we're dealing with has been bad.
Yeah, the other horrible thing, and it's about every day gets worse because more and more restrictions are lifted at a time when the restrictions shouldn't be lifted.
Hey, like I said, I'm going back to work in a couple days.
You are going back to work in a couple days. My dad's going to need me to go back to the market in a couple days.
My dad wants to lick the plastic bags of the market in a couple days.
Tomorrow, we're recording the day before Father's Day. I know exactly what I'm doing for my dad is just take him to the market since he loves doing it, apparently. It's his favorite thing to do. Is to
Can
go
I try
to the
free
market.
samples? Can I have free samples? Hand it to me.
Argue with me about wearing a mask and gloves everywhere he goes?
We're not the authorities on this.
No, certainly not. And I'm not going to pretend like I know
No, and our
anything.
opinions aren't even really valid on this.
Yeah, no, not
but
at all.
I think good
I
things.
think that-
I do think that. Let me activate my sympathy protocols. I think that good things will come out of this. I've seen enough people who understand this and are look at how many different people are supporting Black Lives Matter right now, which didn't happen 4 years ago when they first started.
There was a lot. I feel like there's a lot of resistance.
There was a lot. I think it makes more sense to a lot more people, which is crazy, but it got through to
There's
people.
a tweet going around. Why is it a debate to end racism? Like,
Yeah,
what's even the other side of the argument?
Why is it a debate to wear masks? I'm not the first one to talk about this, but like the fact that we have this virus that you can't see and is killing people is such a perfect metaphor for everything we couldn't have picked a better virus to have unleashed on us.
That people think that you needing to wear a mask is removing your freedoms.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
The metaphors that are flying around right now. Well, look, everybody stay safe.
Yeah.
Stay positive.
Continue being safe.
Continue being safe. Continue being positive. What are you looking
Are the
at?
soles of your shoes a wicker basket? Like wicker? Like it looks like wicker basket.
I'm just wearing wicker baskets.
That's what it is.
I've gone a little crazy in my quarantine.
I learned how to make a couple things from YouTube.
I took Duolingo on how to make wicker, and now I wear them as shoes. But yeah, everyone continue to be safe. We'll see you whatever next month is going to be like. We'll see you.
When you see you. If Daniel's here or not, you're going to get an LA Meekly episode.
Whether or not, I might haunt the next recording, but Greg will certainly be here.
It'll be Greg in a cold spot.
Which is your morning radio show, Greg in the Cold Spot. Anyway, that's been yet another episode of LA Meekly.
Parker and Gates could sit on it since 2013. Okay.
Yeah,
Ready?
I'm done.